I woke up in a strange world and heard a system voice telling me I'd been bound to some kind of invincible lord system. It was supposed to help me become the strongest lord across all worlds, build territory, get rewards, that sort of thing. But then the system glitched out mid-sentence and went silent. No matter how I called out, it wouldn't answer. At least the system panel was still there. It showed my name, an empty territory slot, and one working talent, night summoning. I could summon at least one night per day. Not bad for someone with no power in an unknown world. I used it right away and got a heavy cavalry knight named Tai. He was nearly 2 meters tall, clad in black iron armor trimmed with gold, and came with a massive armored warhorse. He carried a heavy blade, a bow, and an iron spear. He knelt before me and called me, my lord. He had the same face as mine, a familiar look from home. That put me at ease. Tai suddenly warned me something was moving ahead in the forest. I couldn't hear anything beyond birds and wind, but I trusted him. I climbed onto his warhorse and we went to investigate. We found a small village. In the center, a crowd of villagers had surrounded a young girl, shouting to burn her. A man named Alan was leading them, claiming she was a witch who had attracted a demon woman to the village, causing 3 people to be taken. The girl, Elena, kept denying it, saying the demon woman had nothing to do with her. But Alan shut her down by invoking the local nobles. They declared that witches were the reason demon women appeared, and who would dare question the nobles? They tied Elena to a pile of firewood. I'd been watching for a while. The whole thing was absurd, blaming a girl for monsters just because some nobles said so. But I also realized this world had witches and demon women, and I needed information. These ignorant villagers wouldn't be much help, but the so-called witch probably knew something useful. I wrote in. The moment the villagers saw Tai's gleaming armor and weapons, they froze. Even their local nobles didn't have gear like that. Alan dropped to his knees and tried to explain they were just burning a witch. I asked him one simple question. Did he actually see her summon the demon woman? He stammered and admitted he hadn't. He was just repeating what the nobles said. That was enough for me. I told Tai to bring the girl over. Alan tried to stop him, but Tai flicked him aside like nothing. Elena thanked me, looking stunned. I told her I had some questions and asked if she'd be willing to talk. She seemed shocked that a noble would speak to her so politely. Before she could answer, someone screamed from the edge of the village. The demon woman is coming. The villagers screamed that the demon woman was coming. I looked up and saw a woman in a black cloak walking toward us, carrying a wooden staff. Butterflies swirled around her. Alan immediately pointed at Elena again, blaming her for attracting the demon woman. He even crawled over and begged me to kill Elena so the demon woman would leave. I told him to shut up. I quietly asked Tai if he could handle her. He smiled and said she was nothing, like a straw dog. That gave me confidence. I spoke to the demon woman directly. She seemed surprised to see a knight here and warned us not to interfere. She only wanted a few laborers from the village. But I had a question for her first. I asked if it was true that witches were the ones who attracted demon women. She laughed at that. She said witches were far too weak and insignificant for her to bother with. They had nothing to do with her showing up. Alan's face went blank. His whole excuse for burning Elena had just been destroyed by the demon woman herself. Even the other villagers lowered their heads in shame. When Alan still tried to argue, the demon woman got angry. She said whoever spread those lies about demon women being connected to witches deserved to die. Elena dropped to her knees and begged me to save the villagers. She said they were just deceived, not truly evil. I told her I understood and called Tai forward. The demon woman warned me that one night wasn't enough to stop her. Tai didn't bother responding. He just drew his blade and charged. The demon woman chanted a spell and summoned 10 monkey-like creatures carrying stone hammers through magic circles. But Tai cut through them like paper. He split them in half with single swings, and when one got close enough to grab, he crushed its head with his bare hand. I turned to Elena and asked if demon women were really this weak. She explained this one was probably low level. Stronger demon women could summon dragons from the demon realm. They also knew attack magic that could kill even powerful knights if they weren't careful. Then I asked her something important. Could she use magic? She said she'd only just become a witch and could only use healing spells, nothing offensive. A healer. My eyes lit up. I could summon knights every day, but knights get hurt in battle. Having someone who could heal them would multiply my fighting power. I made up my mind right there. I asked Eilina if she'd be willing to follow me. She stared at me in disbelief. In this kingdom, witches were considered cursed. The nobles feared their powers and spread lies to destroy them. No noble had ever offered to take one in. She said yes. Meanwhile, Tai finished off every last creature. The demon woman panicked and tried vine magic next, but Tai stomped through the vines and slashed them apart. He charged at her, and she barely escaped by turning her cloak into black mist and vanishing. She shouted that she'd remember me and come back. I wasn't worried. I could summon at least one knight every day. If she returned, I'd capture her and make her talk. The villagers came forward and knelt to thank me. I wasn't in the mood to be nice about it. I pointed at Eilina and told them they should be thanking her. If not for her, I wouldn't have bothered saving them. That shut everyone up. Most of them looked genuinely ashamed, considering they'd been ready to burn her alive just minutes ago. Only Alan's face stayed dark. He spoke up again, warning that the demon woman would return and the whole village could be destroyed. I looked at him with disgust. I'd almost forgotten about this fly. Alan begged for mercy, but none of the villagers stepped in to help him. After all, he'd nearly gotten them to burn the very person who ended up saving them. I had him thrown out of the village. After that, I told the villagers I'd stay for a few days, and if the demon woman returned, I'd deal with her. They were clearly relieved. An old man stepped forward and introduced himself as Old White, the village chief of Blair Village. He promised the village would provide supplies during my stay. I told them I'd be staying at Eilina's house, and that from now on, she was under my protection. Old White apologized to Eilina on behalf of the village. She said she didn't blame them, but I could see her eyes were red. Being nearly burned alive by your own neighbors isn't something you just forget. Eilina's house was on the east side of the village, tiny, just 2 rooms. The living room was filled with herbs and books. She was embarrassed by how small it was, but I didn't mind. It was clean, and that was enough. Tai stood guard at the door. I asked Eilina to tell me about this world. She looked confused. Why would a noble need a commoner to explain? I quickly covered by saying it was a test she needed to pass to officially become my attendant. She bought it completely. Here's what I learned. The world is vast, but Eilina only knew about the Kingdom of Lane. It has one main city, Lane City, plus 10 towns and over 100 villages. Beyond humans, there are elves, beastmen, centaurs, dwarves, and other races. The races mostly fight each other. Some human kingdoms have been wiped out by beastmen, though humans have won battles too. The kingdom sounded incredibly small, probably the size of a single county back home. I asked about the military. Lane Kingdom has 10 knights and 500 soldiers guarding the capital. Each town lord has their own forces too. The local lord of Isekai'd town, Lord Roland, has 2 knights and 100 soldiers. Enough to keep low-level demon women from causing trouble in town, but nothing impressive. This was great news. My system lets me summon at least 1 heavy knight per day. In less than a month, I'd have over 20 knights as strong as Tai. That would be enough to take over Isekai'd town first, then the other towns, recruit soldiers along the way, and eventually conquer the entire kingdom. But I needed to be patient. The biggest problem right now was food. I had warriors, but no supplies. If the system hadn't glitched, maybe it could have helped, but all I had was the knight summoning function. Maybe once I claimed actual territory, the system would change. Eilina served dinner, some green vegetables, and hard bread. It looked rough, but actually tasted decent. I noticed she wasn't eating. She claimed she wasn't hungry, but I could tell she'd given all the food to me. Right on time, Old White showed up carrying vegetables and grain from the village. I gratefully accepted, but he lingered at the door, looking like he wanted to say something. I told him to speak freely. He said the village had a favor to ask, but only if I was willing. Eilina interrupted Old White before he could finish, warning him not to send me somewhere dangerous. That made me curious, so I told her to let him speak. Old White explained that the demon woman had been raiding the village for a while. About 10 young people had been taken over time. Since she'd said she needed laborers, he believed they were still alive. He asked if my knight could go to the demon woman's hideout and rescue them. He said the villagers had pulled together 50 gold coins and 200 pounds of grain as payment. Eilina got angry at that. She said they were treating me like a mercenary. But Old White was desperate. He couldn't just let the young people die. Then Eilina told me the full truth. The place was actually a castle belonging to Princess Midia of Lane Kingdom. 10 years ago, demon women had sealed the princess inside. The kingdom had tried to rescue her dozens of times and lost 5 knights in the process. There were at least 3 demon women inside that castle. She said it was far too dangerous for just one night. She also mentioned that the kingdom had a standing bounty. Whoever rescued the princess would receive a noble title and territory. Old White backed off after hearing how dangerous it was, but I told him I'd accept the request. I just needed 3 days before setting out. Eilina couldn't understand why I agreed. As a noble, I had no reason to risk my life, but I was already rethinking my plans. Instead of conquering Lane Kingdom by force, I could rescue the princess, earn a title and land legally, and then find an excuse to take over from the inside. Public support matters. I wasn't here to be a bandit. I was here to build a domain. I told Eilina to eat something and stop starving herself. I said she was very important to me. Her face turned red, and she looked at me with wide eyes. I quickly clarified. I meant her which abilities were important for building my future territory. She seemed a little disappointed by that explanation. At bedtime, there was an awkward moment since Eilina only had one bedroom. I made her take the bed and had Tai borrow some blankets from Old White so we could sleep in the living room. As soon as midnight passed, I opened my system panel. The daily summoning had reset. I called for a new knight, and sure enough, a second heavy cavalry knight appeared, identical gear to Tai, different face. He introduced himself as Tai. I told him to take turns with Tai on guard duty and went back to sleep. The next morning, Eilina noticed Tai and was surprised. I told her I had other knights on the way too. She immediately assumed I'd agreed to the castle mission because I'd already planned for reinforcements. I let her believe that. But before she could think too much about it, Old White came running over in a panic. He said soldiers from Isekai'd town had arrived at the village, and Alan had brought them. I wasn't surprised when I heard soldiers from Isekai'd town had arrived. A mysterious noble showing up in a small village with a knight was bound to attract attention. I want to meet them. In the village square, a knight in European-style armor sat on a small reddish horse, with 10 soldiers in plain clothes behind him. Alan was standing nearby, eagerly telling the knight that the village was hiding a witch and that I was some kind of heretic working with her. But the moment that knight saw my 2 heavy cavalry riders on their massive warhorses in full black armor, he froze. Compared to my knights, he looked like a peasant pretending to be nobility. He immediately dismounted and bowed to me. He introduced himself as Baron, a knight serving Lord Roland of Isekai'd town. He said his lord had heard I drove off a demon woman and wanted to meet me. Alan kept trying to insist I should be punished for protecting a witch, but Baron had already read the situation. He said if I wanted to protect a witch, Lord Roland would have no objections. When Alan wouldn't shut up, Baron ordered his soldiers to kill him and dump his body in the forest for wolves. Alan screamed, but nobody stopped it. Even Eilina, who felt some pity, knew he'd brought it on himself after trying to get me killed. I told Baron my name was Zhuang Hua and that I'd come to rescue Princess Midia from the forest castle. He was shocked. That castle had been a forbidden zone for 10 years. Many knights and nobles from other countries had tried and failed. But he respected my decision and promised no one would interfere with my mission in the forest. He invited me to visit Lord Roland afterward, if I made it back alive. After Baron left, I asked Old White to find a hunter who knew the way to the castle. Old White hesitated, but Eilina pushed him. His own son had been taken by the demon women too. He wanted to find someone. Eilina insisted on coming along. She said her magic wasn't strong, but she understood demon women's spells and could heal people. I agreed. Old White brought a middle-aged hunter named Volume 50, who carried a bow and knew the forest well. I made it clear, this was a scouting mission, not an attack. Just find the castle, observe, and come back. Volume 50 explained that the outer forest was safe hunting ground, but deeper in, magic creatures appeared. They'd stumbled on the castle by accident while chasing prey, and that's when people got captured. We found the castle. It was covered in vines, glowing with a faint blue light from inside. Strange plants surrounded it, along with the same monkey-like creatures Tai had killed before. I couldn't see anything about the demon women from here. I pulled out paper and a pen I'd borrowed from Eilina's house and sketched the entire castle layout. Eilina was amazed at how accurately I drew it. I told her it was nothing special. I'd spent 3 years studying art with my ex-girlfriend back in college. Basic sketching was easy. I mapped out the surrounding terrain and was about to leave when I spotted a figure coming out of the castle. It was the same demon woman from yesterday. I turned to Tai and asked if they could capture her. Tai said he could beat the demon woman but couldn't stop her from escaping. Her vanishing trick was too strange. That's when Eilina spoke up. She said she could cast a binding spell that would prevent the demon woman from using magic to flee. She couldn't defeat her, but she could trap her. That was exactly what I needed. I told Tai to wait for Eilina's spell, then grab her. Eilina raised her hands, chanted something, and green light poured out of her toward the demon woman. The demon woman spotted us and recognized what Eilina was doing, a binding spell. She tried to run, but Tai cut off her escape route, and the green light wrapped around her. She couldn't use her vanishing trick anymore. She started threatening us, saying someone called Lady Mou was inside the castle and would come after us. Tai didn't care. He knocked her unconscious with one strike to the neck. We took her back to the village. When she woke up, she found herself sitting in front of me with Tai's blade at her throat. Her name was Linka. She offered to leave the village alone if I let her go. I wasn't interested in that deal. I asked her how many demon women were in the castle and what had happened to the princess. When she hesitated, Tai pressed the blade until it drew blood. She talked. There were 5 demon women total, led by Lady Mou. The princess was alive, but strangely, the demon women weren't the ones keeping her prisoner. Linka didn't know the real reason and swore she was telling the truth. I offered her a chance to work for me. Eilina was worried about recruiting a demon woman, but I told her ability was all that mattered. However, Linka took the offer as an insult and refused angrily. I didn't push it. I gave Tai a look, and he took her outside. A scream followed. She was dead. Eilina was shaken. I asked her if she thought I was cruel. She said no, it was the right thing, but she wasn't used to killing yet. I told her to get used to it. There would be a lot more fighting ahead. Now I knew there were only 4 demon women left, and the mystery about the princess deepened. If the demon women didn't imprison her, who did? I'd have to take the castle to find out. At midnight, I summoned again and got lucky. 2 knights this time instead of 1. Tai San and Tai Si. That brought my total to 4 heavy cavalry knights. Enough to move on the castle. The next morning, Eilina saw the 2 new knights and was even more impressed. She assumed I had a large noble house sending reinforcements. As we prepared to leave, Old White was waiting at the village edge with 10 hunters armed with bows and short blades. He said they'd talked it over and wanted to help. The captured villagers were their family members. I accepted. Extra hands couldn't hurt. I told them to stay in the rear and support us. Our squad of 16 headed into the forest. Meanwhile, inside the castle, Lady Mou was frowning, wondering why Linka hadn't come back yet. Inside the castle, the demon women had no idea what was coming. Mou, their leader, dismissed the idea that anyone could threaten her. One of her underlings mentioned that Linka had encountered a powerful knight in the village, but Mou shrugged it off. She looked down on all the local nobles. She was obsessed with something else entirely. Apparently, Princess Midia was the key to summoning a magic dragon, a creature powerful enough to destroy an entire kingdom. The demon women had been forcing captured villagers to build something inside the castle for this ritual. Once it was finished, Mou planned to unleash the dragon on Lane Kingdom. Then she sensed us approaching. She sent 2 demon women out to deal with what she assumed were just more foolish intruders. I didn't bother hiding our approach. Tyr cleared out the magic creatures guarding the castle entrance on his own. When 2 demon women flew out surrounded by butterflies, I'll admit, seeing people actually fly made me jealous. But I figured if I captured 4 demon women, I could make them carry me around like a sedan chair. Same effect. The hunters were terrified just seeing the demon women, but I told them to stay back and watch. I had Eilina start casting her binding spell while the knights moved in. The 2 demon women summoned hordes of monsters through magic circles and sent vines and plants to attack. But my knights were too fast and too strong. Their warhorses leaped over the vines. Tai charged straight at one demon woman, smashed through her defense spell in 2 seconds, and when she tried to flee, Eilina's binding spell locked her in place. Tai's blade took her head off. The second demon woman panicked. She noticed Eilina and realized a witch was working with me, something unheard of. But before she could react, another knight shattered her shield. This one managed to escape using her vanishing spell before Eilina could bind her to. Eilina apologized, saying she wasn't strong enough to cast 2 spells at once. I told her she'd done great. We pushed forward to the castle. We already knew the layout from yesterday's scouting. But as we reached the entrance, a purple energy barrier blasted us back several meters. 3 figures appeared on top of the castle. Eilina told me the one in front was a greater demon woman, stronger magic than ordinary ones. Mou glared down at us, furious about the one we'd killed. She called Eilina a fool for serving a noble. Eilina shot back that I was different, that I was a good person. Mou wasn't interested in debating. She hurled a fireball at me. Tai split it in half with a single swing. Then he raised his blade and brought it crashing down on the purple barrier. It cracked open. Mou was stunned. She said even Lane Kingdom's top knight couldn't break that shield, yet Tai nearly shattered it in one blow. I gave her a chance. I told her to release the captured villagers and hand over the princess, and I'd spare her life. She didn't answer. I ordered the knights to break down the gate. All 4 of them kicked it open, and we charged inside. Mou's eyes went wide, but she wasn't ready to give up. The princess was her ticket to becoming a high-ranking demon woman. She told her followers to stop us from finding the princess at all costs. She wasn't worried, though. She'd held this castle for 10 years and watched plenty of knights die trying to take it. She expected today to be no different. The moment we entered the castle, we found 10 knights in full armor, standing like statues. Eilina recognized them. They were knights who'd come to rescue the princess over the years. The demon women had turned them into puppets. They suddenly came to life and drew their weapons. Tai told the hunters to guard me while he and the other 3 knights handled them. Armored against armored. It was a real fight this time. Mou appeared inside the castle and gave me one last chance to leave. I gave her the same offer back, submit or die. She laughed like I'd told the funniest joke she'd ever heard. She said nobles had always persecuted witches and demon women, and now one wanted her to kneel? Ridiculous. Then she summoned a demon knight, a huge creature with a giant sword. Eilina's eyes went wide. She said only powerful demon women could summon something like that. But Tai was on another level. He smashed through the puppet knights one by one, knocking their heads clean off. When the demon knight charged at him, Tai slapped it right back. The demon knight took one look at Tai and decided this wasn't worth it. It just vanished. Mou was furious that her own summon ran away from a fight. With the battle over, I offered Mou one final chance to surrender. She refused. She tried to escape, and Eilina hit her with the binding spell, but Mou was too strong. She shattered it with a flash of purple light and disappeared in a cloud of butterflies. Eilina apologized, but I told her not to worry. Killing Mou wasn't the goal. Finding the princess and the villagers was. We searched the castle. The villagers were found quickly. Old White's son, Jonathan White, was among them. He told me something useful. The demon women had forced them to build an altar in the basement. While working down there, they'd repeatedly heard a woman's voice crying out in pain. He believed it was the princess. We went to the basement. The knights had already checked it earlier and found nothing but stone blocks and tools. But Eilina had an idea. She said powerful demon women could create magical barriers to trap living things in a sleeping state. The altar might have been built on top of such a barrier. I ordered the altar destroyed. As the stones were cleared away, a crystal coffin appeared underneath. Inside lay a breathtakingly beautiful woman, Princess Midia, looking exactly as she had 10 years ago, perfectly preserved. Meanwhile outside, Mou wasn't angry anymore. She was afraid. She told her remaining followers something chilling. The princess wasn't the prisoner. She was the jailer. As long as Midia slept, everything was fine. But if she woke up, it would be a disaster even Mou couldn't control. Mou made her decision instantly. Run. Leave Au town. Get as far away as possible. Back in the basement, everyone was staring at the sleeping princess. I agreed she was stunning, even more beautiful than Eilina. But then I noticed something strange. The temperature was dropping fast. Ice started spreading everywhere, across the altar, up the walls, coating everything in frost. I ordered everyone out of the basement immediately. Within moments, the entire underground chamber was frozen solid. Jonathan swore nothing like this had ever happened while they were working down there. Eilina studied the situation and explained it was caused by magic power leaking out of someone's body. When a person has too much uncontrolled magical energy, it manifests physically, in this case, as ice. That meant whoever was in that coffin had ice-type magic. Extremely powerful ice-type magic. Jonathan and Volume 50 put it together nervously. If only demon women have magic power, then Princess Midia was a demon woman. Eilina confirmed it was possible. I didn't care, demon woman or not. Rescuing her completed my mission. As long as the kingdom's bounty was still valid, I'd deliver her to the king myself. Just as Eilina predicted, the freezing stopped after a while. We went back down. The area around the crystal coffin was completely clear of ice, strangely enough. Tai pried the lid open. Midia was breathing, still alive after 10 years sealed inside. This world kept getting more interesting. Maybe one day I could even achieve immortality here. Eilina placed her hand on Midia's forehead and used her healing magic. Green light glowed from her body. After about 15 minutes, she said the princess should be able to wake up. Midia opened her eyes. She looked at me and asked who I was. I introduced myself, Zhuanghua, here to rescue her per Lane Kingdom's bounty. She stared at me for a moment, then shook her head. She said she didn't need rescuing and told us to leave. I told her flatly that it wasn't her decision. I'd decided she needed rescuing, and that was that. She got angry and said this wasn't funny. I said I wasn't joking. I told Tai to bring her upstairs. She realized quickly that if she refused, Tai would simply carry her out by force. Outside the basement, the cold aura around her had stopped. Her magic power was spent. She tried to explain why she couldn't leave. She told me her story. She was born a demon woman. Her magic froze her mother to death during childbirth. A wise man suppressed her powers for years, but they kept growing stronger. Eventually, she asked her father to build this castle for her in the forest so she could live away from people. For a while, she was happy here. But one day, her magic leaked out and froze all her maids to death, shattering them into pieces. Then Mou came and told her that sleeping in the crystal coffin would prevent her magic from leaking and hurting anyone else. So she chose to sleep for 10 years. She told me she didn't need saving. If I truly wanted to help her, I should leave her alone. I listened to the whole story, then shrugged. Sad story, very dramatic, but it had nothing to do with me. She still needed rescuing. She got furious. She asked if I knew what being a demon woman meant in Lane Kingdom. It meant disaster. I asked her what that had to do with me. I needed territory and a title. She was so frustrated she almost laughed. I pointed at Eilina and told Midia she was a witch, and she knew what witches meant in this kingdom. Persecution, death. Yet Eilina was out here saving people while nobles exploited commoners. I told Midia I thought she'd been lied to. Every demon woman I'd met could control her own power. Whether they hurt people was their choice, not some curse. Then I looked her in the eye and asked the real question. Didn't she want to actually live her own life for once? Didn't she think her father missed her? Midia froze when I mentioned her father. I could tell she missed him deeply. They hadn't seen each other in over 10 years. But she shook her head. She said she couldn't risk hurting him. She offered to write a letter to the king so I could still get my title and land, as long as I left her behind. I told her she was being stubborn. The whole point of everything I'd said was that magic power can be controlled. She blinked, finally understanding what I meant. But she asked who would teach her. No demon woman would help her. I turned to Eilina and asked if witch magic and demon woman magic were compatible. She said yes. If the princess was willing to learn her techniques, the magic leaking problem could be solved. I looked back at Midia. Problem solved. She stared at me, probably wondering if I'd planned this from the start. I told her that if her father truly loved her, the whole witch and demon woman stigma wouldn't matter. And clearly he loved her. She'd accidentally killed her mother at birth with her magic. Yet her father never blamed her and kept her alive all these years. I asked her one more time, would she come with me? She said yes. Eilina watched the whole exchange with her hands pressed together, thinking it looked like some kind of wedding scene. She shook the thought out of her head quickly. I sent Eilina to teach Midia how to control her magic, and told Tyre to escort the rescued villagers back to the village with the hunters. But Volume 50 stayed behind. He knelt and said all 10 hunters had decided before entering the castle. They wanted to become my followers permanently. I asked if Old White had pressured them. Volume 50 said no. He told me they'd spent their whole lives being oppressed by nobles. They saw in me someone who broke through ignorant prejudice, and they wanted to follow me to change their fate. I appreciated that honesty. People with personal ambitions actually serve better than those without. But I warned them, following me meant facing enemies worse than demon women. War kills people. Volume 50 said they'd already accepted that when they made their decision. I agreed to take them. I needed people, not just for fighting, but for managing whatever territory I'd eventually control. Knights from the system alone wouldn't be enough. That night, Ilena came out of Midia's room drenched in sweat. She had urgent news. Midia's magic power was far greater than she'd imagined. If we hadn't intervened today and left her in the castle, within half a month the uncontrolled magic would have spread across all of Isekai'd town. I was confused. Earlier it had only frozen one basement. Ilena explained that Midia's power wasn't ordinary magic. It was a curse. Her teacher had once told her about a type of curse cast on babies before birth, giving them enormous innate magic that grows stronger every day. This cursed magic could be used to summon a powerful demon dragon from hell, bypassing all normal restrictions on summoning rank. That was why MOU had kept Midia. She was the key to summoning a dragon. But left unchecked, the cursed magic would spread outward, draining the life force of anyone it touched. That's what had killed her maids years ago. Not just ice, but life-draining cursed energy. I took a sharp breath. Midia was far more dangerous and more valuable than I'd realized. Ilena quickly reassured me. She'd already taught Midia how to control her magic. From now on, it wouldn't leak anymore. I told Ilena she was truly invaluable. I asked her what she wanted. Anything within my power, I'd grant it. She shook her head. All she wanted was for me to never send her away. I'd have to be insane to let her go. This girl was a treasure. The nobles of this world were fools. Witches and demon women could bring incredible power if used properly, yet all these idiots wanted was to destroy them. But I wasn't like these local nobles. I was the man who would unite this entire continent. I looked at Ilena and made her a promise. As long as she stayed, I would never abandon her. That night, Ilena went to her room flustered, muttering apologies to herself for thinking too much about what I'd said. I didn't know about that. I was already focused on the next day. The system gave me another night at midnight. That made 5 total. The next morning, we headed back to the village first so Ilena and Vol's group could say goodbye and pack their things. On the way to Isekai'd town, Midia asked me something I'd been dreading. Why would someone with so many powerful knights care about a small kingdom's title and land? She assumed I came from a much larger nation. I couldn't exactly tell her I was from another world, so I made something up. I told her my homeland was a great nation with brutal competition, 6 years of small exams, 3 years of middle exams, another 3 years of big exams, and even after all that, more tests before you could inherit anything. I said I'd gotten tired of that life and came here voluntarily. She took it completely the wrong way. She decided I was a prince who'd been through terrible hardship and fled to Lane Kingdom. She even got emotional about it and promised to ask her father to give me a good territory. I almost felt bad, but having a princess vouch for my fake backstory was too useful to correct. We collected Old White's reward and left the village. Our group now had 5 knights, 10 hunters as followers, Ilena, and Princess Midia. Meanwhile in Isekai'd town, Lord Roland was panicking. His scouts reported I'd come out of the castle alive with the princess and now had 5 knights and 10 followers. Enough force to take his town. He was trying to figure out how to handle me when MOU appeared right in front of him. She swatted his knight into a wall with one hand, then delivered a warning. She told Roland that Midia carried a deadly curse that would kill everyone in town if she entered. She claimed the real princess was already dead and this one was a fake, because no one stays the same age for 10 years. Then she vanished, leaving Roland terrified. Roland couldn't take the risk. He ordered the town gates closed. We arrived at Isekai'd town by evening after a full day of travel. The gates were shut. I sent Volume 50 to call up to the guards and announce that I'd brought Princess Midia. The guards said nothing. Complete silence. Volume 50 shouted again, louder. Still nothing. He was furious, but held himself back since he didn't want to cause trouble for me. Tai stepped forward and offered to smash the gates open. I was tempted, and Midia could see it on my face. She quickly stopped me and said she'd handle it herself. She was the princess, after all. The local nobles should recognize her. But when she approached the wall, the guards finally spoke, and it wasn't what she expected. They called her a fake, a demon woman pretending to be the princess. They said the real princess would have aged in 10 years, and since she looked exactly the same, she had to be an imposter. They told her to leave or face consequences. Midia went quiet. She'd been asleep for a decade and hadn't considered that looking unchanged would make people doubt her. She tried again, asking them to bring Lord Roland so she could prove her identity. The guards told her to get lost. Midia looked devastated after being rejected at her own kingdom's gate. She apologized to me, ashamed that she couldn't even open the door to her own territory. I laughed and told her it wasn't her fault. The people of Isekai'd town were rebels. If they were loyal, they would have verified her identity and reported to her father instead of just cursing at her and refusing to open up. That meant they'd turned against the kingdom. Midia asked what we should do since this was the only road to the capital. I told her not to worry. If they were rebels, we'd just crush them. I called Tai and gave the order, take Isekai'd town. He didn't ask questions. He just said yes. The town walls were low and the gate wasn't thick. This was just a small town, after all. Tai started by shooting an arrow from horseback at long range, killing a guard on the wall instantly. Then he announced to the town that Lord Roland had betrayed Lane Kingdom, and that we were acting on behalf of Princess Midia to punish the traitor. Anyone who resisted would be killed without mercy. Roland didn't take it seriously. He thought 15 people couldn't possibly take his town and went off to rest, leaving his knight in charge. My 5 knights rode up and unleashed a volley of arrows. 5 more guards dropped. The defenders were terrified. They hadn't seen real combat in years. Roland's knight tried to peek over the wall and nearly got his head taken off. An arrow dented his helmet so badly it squeezed his skull. While 2 knights kept the wall guards pinned down with arrows, I had volume 50 and the hunters grab a heavy log and ram the gate. 1 hit was all it took. The gate flew open and Tai Yi's group charged inside, cutting through the defenders at the entrance. They stormed up to the wall from the staircase. The guards were trapped. If they stood up, the archers outside shot them. If they stayed down, the knights coming up the stairs would reach them. Most of them gave up immediately. Tai Yi called out that the princess ordered surrender. Lay down your weapons and live, or keep fighting and die. The regular soldiers threw down their arms. Only Roland's personal knight refused. He challenged Tai Yi to a duel. Tai Yi respected his loyalty and accepted, but it was no contest. Tai Yi's armor was better, his strength was overwhelming, and his weapon skills were superior. One clash sent the knight's sword flying. Tai Yi kicked him to the ground and drove his blade through the gap in his neck armor. It was brutal and decisive. The remaining soldiers were shaking. Tai Yi asked where Roland was. One of them stammered that he was in his manor and offered to lead the way. Tai Yi sent volume 50 to bring me and Midia inside while he went to capture Roland. I turned to Midia with a grin. See, we got in after all. We got inside, but Midia wasn't happy about how. She'd been raised with noble manners and thought we should have proven our identity properly instead of smashing our way in. I told her that a kingdom needs to be tough on traitors, otherwise the royal family loses all authority. She still seemed confused. She remembered the Roland family always being respectful to her father. I told her that was just a mask. The moment they recognized her and still refused entry, that was rebellion. Tai Yi brought Roland before me, along with his entire family under guard. I reminded Roland that his own knight had invited me to dinner after rescuing the princess. Now when I actually showed up with the princess, he slammed the door in our faces. Unforgivable. I ordered his entire family executed and his head displayed publicly as a warning. Midia objected. She said it was just a misunderstanding and that Lane Kingdom had never executed a noble before. I grabbed her shoulders and looked her in the eye. I told her that mercy toward enemies was cruelty toward herself. Did she want the kingdom overthrown someday, with her and her father locked in chains? Roland tried to defend himself. He said a demon woman had warned him that Midia was cursed and would kill everyone in town. I laughed at that. The princess had been imprisoned by demon women for 10 years, and now Roland was admitting he'd taken orders from one? That was collaboration with the enemy. Case closed. Tai Yi carried out the execution. Roland's head came off cleanly. Midia was shaken. She worried about divine punishment. In this kingdom, nobles were supposedly protected by God. I told her bluntly that if God were real and just, Roland deserved to die even more. I wasn't about to let superstition paralyze us. Later, Eilina led Midia to the Baron's manor to rest. Midia asked Eilina if I was always like this, disrespecting the gods, not valuing life. Eilina smiled and said she didn't know about gods, but I was the only person in this world who accepted witches and demon women. To her, I was her god. Tai reported the spoils: 5,000 gold coins, various jewels, and 30,000 pounds of grain from Roland's estate. I ordered the gold kept, the jewels sold, and most of the grain distributed to the poor, but only the poor. Not a single grain to the wealthy. Then my system panel lit up. It detected that I'd conquered Isekai'd town and asked if I wanted to claim it as territory. I looked around and said no. The location was bad, no natural defenses, no resources, too few people. Not worth making my base. The system registered it as a conquered but unclaimed territory and gave me a reward: infinite space, a storage ability that could hold unlimited non-living items. That was incredibly useful. Then the system tried to activate something called a mission system, but it glitched out again with crackling sounds and failed. I cursed under my breath. Not again. The system glitched again. My infinite space got downgraded to just 100 cubic meters of storage. The gap between unlimited and 100 was painful. I tried asking the system what was wrong, but as usual, no answer. Still, 100 cubic meters was better than nothing. I'd been worrying about how to transport all the gold and grain. Now I just waved my hand in the warehouse, and everything vanished into storage. I pulled out 10,000 pounds of grain and told Tai to organize a distribution the next morning, and to make sure everyone knew who gave it to them. I wasn't doing charity anonymously. I wanted these people to remember my name. That night I summoned again and hit the jackpot. 3 nights at once. That brought my total to 8 heavy cavalry. At this rate, I'd have an unstoppable army before long. I could flatten entire kingdoms if I wanted. But I reminded myself, I was here to build, not destroy. The next morning, Midia woke to crowds cheering my name outside. She came out and saw me distributing grain to the poor of Isekai'd town. She didn't fully understand why I was doing it, but when she looked at the grateful faces, she went quiet. She told me I was better than nobles like Roland, not just in strength, but in kindness. I told her I was just helping the princess take care of her people. We left Isekai'd town in style. I'd claimed Roland's fancy carriage, beautifully decorated with strong horses. Much better than riding on Tai's warhorse. I asked Midia if she minded sharing the carriage. She made room, and I climbed in. 8 armored knights flanked us, with volume 50 and 10 followers behind. We looked like royalty. 2 days to Dana City, which governed 3 southwestern towns, including Isekai'd. Then 2 more days to the capital after that. On the road, Midia spoke up nervously. She asked me to please let her handle things diplomatically if Dana City had any misunderstandings about her identity. No storming the gates this time. I laughed. Clearly she was worried I'd wipe out another noble family. I agreed to let her try first, but warned that if anyone disrespected her, I wouldn't hold back. She seemed touched. She still thought I was a foreign prince, and the fact that I treated her with respect despite my supposed high status warmed her heart. But she also worried about my ruthlessness and feared the gods would punish me for killing nobles. Our convoy stopped when we reached a forest blocking the road. Tai went ahead to scout for danger. I told everyone to rest and prepare dinner while we waited. Meanwhile, something troubling was happening that I didn't notice. Eilina was watching Midia and me together, and she felt left out. She'd met me first, but now the princess seemed closer to me. A voice crept into Eilina's mind. Imoyu was using some kind of telepathy to manipulate her. The voice whispered jealous thoughts, telling Eilina that Midia had stolen everything from her, that she should get rid of the princess. But Eilina was stronger than that. She told the voice she would never betray me and shut it out. Imoyu was watching from a nearby tree, furious that her manipulation had failed. She'd wanted Eilina to turn on Midia so she could reclaim her key to summoning the demon dragon. But Eilina's loyalty to me was unbreakable. Imoyu stared at us from the shadows and muttered that this forest would be our grave. She still hadn't given up on summoning the dragon. Tai reported the forest was clear, so we stopped to eat before moving on. I used the chance to ask Midia about Lane Kingdom and the wider world. She told me Lane Kingdom had 4 cities and 10 towns. It looked big, but was actually small. To the north was the Hill Kingdom, 10 times larger. To the west, beastman tribes threatened the borders. Only a joint military alliance led by Hill Kingdom kept them at bay. Lane Kingdom mostly provided resources and supplies rather than frontline soldiers. Then she mentioned the Holy Temple Knights, a force of over 10,000 knights led by 10 Round Table Knights. They'd once wiped out an entire organization of high-ranking demon women who could summon dragons. This was the real power behind the continent. Here was the troubling part. The Holy Temple had issued a kill order against all demon women. That's why Lane Kingdom hated them so much. If Midia's father hadn't hidden her identity, she'd have been killed as a child. The order also covered witches, which made Eilena's face go dark too. I told them both not to worry. The Holy Temple was far away, and as long as I was around, nobody would use their identities against them. I didn't care what the temple decreed. Witches and demon women were people, and blanket kill orders were wrong. Midia panicked and covered my mouth, telling me not to say such things out loud. I waved it off. Someday I'd be powerful enough that the temple would kneel if I told them to. We entered the forest but couldn't make it through before nightfall, so we set up camp. Then one of my men reported a little girl had shown up outside camp. I went to look. She was about 7 or 8, wearing a red hood and red cloak, carrying a basket. She looked exactly like Little Red Riding Hood from the fairy tale. She said she'd gotten lost picking wild vegetables and was scared her grandmother would worry. The resemblance to the story was too obvious. I didn't respond right away. I asked Tai if they'd spotted any villages during the scouting. He said there was a settlement nearby, but off our route. Then I had Eilena check the girl for magic power. She came back clean, just an ordinary child. I sent Tai with 2 followers to escort her home. But hours passed. Tai didn't come back. 2 hours, then past midnight, still nothing. It was strange, but Tai was strong enough that ordinary demon women couldn't touch him. I decided not to worry yet. At midnight, I summoned my daily knight. This time something different happened. Instead of a heavy cavalry knight, the system announced a holy light knight, a flash of golden light, and there she stood, a female knight. Knight Alice, reporting to my master. Alice was completely different from my other knights. She had golden hair, blue eyes, and gleaming gold armor, the image of a holy warrior. I immediately made her my personal guard. Someone that impressive should stay by my side. Right away, Alice proved her worth. She could sense magic, something none of my other knights could do. She detected a battle happening nearby and told me that if we didn't intervene, Tai would be trapped and killed there. She wouldn't go alone, though. I'd ordered her to guard me, and she took that literally. She refused to leave my side, even to save someone else. So I told her to take me with her. I left Tai and the others to protect Midia and Eilena. Alice scooped me onto her horse with one arm and rode into the darkness at incredible speed, never slowing even without light. We found the village in flames. Over 100 villagers were huddled together crying. Little Red Riding Hood was among them. An old woman explained that after Tai brought the girl home, 2 demon women attacked. They burned the village and tried to kill everyone. Tai fought them off but got trapped in a cage made of giant vines, surrounded by fire. My 2 followers who'd gone with him were already dead. I told the villagers to wait and called Alice forward. We reached Tai's position. He was hacking at the vine cage endlessly. He could cut through it, but it healed instantly, and flames kept hitting him from outside. 2 demon women stood nearby, constantly casting spells to maintain the trap. Alice drew her holy sword and announced herself. One demon woman laughed, calling her just another tin can. Alice swung her blade once. A wave of energy, like a sword beam, cut through the fire and vines instantly. Everything vanished. The demon women panicked. They recognized it. Only Holy Temple Knights could nullify magic like that. They turned to run. Tai burst free, grabbed his bow, and shot one through the shoulder. She couldn't use her escape magic either. Alice's holy power had blocked it. Alice vanished from where she stood and appeared beside the other demon woman in an instant. One strike. Dead. The wounded one glared at me before dying. She said MOU had underestimated me, but warned that I'd also underestimated MOU. She hinted that something was happening back at my camp. I wasn't too worried. 7 heavy knights were guarding Midia and Eilena. Even MOU couldn't break through that. I had Tai finish her off. These demon women burned an innocent village and killed my men just to get at me. I had no mercy for people who treated lives like nothing. I asked Alice if she could put out the village fires. She knelt and apologized. Her power only broke magical barriers, not real fire. A little disappointing, but still incredibly useful. Tai had minor wounds that Ilena could heal later. We went to check on the villagers. They all knelt and thanked me, but said their village was destroyed and they had nothing to offer in return. I told them my name was Zhuanghua. I'd rescued Princess Midia and was about to become a lord of Lane Kingdom. Since their village was gone, I asked if they'd be willing to follow me. The villagers gratefully accepted my offer. There were only about 100 of them, with around 30 able-bodied men. I took 10 with me and left 10,000 pounds of grain at the village entrance, enough for half a year. I'd come back to resettle everyone once I knew where my territory would be. Alice suddenly warned me she sensed massive magical energy and demon creatures coming from the direction of our camp. Mou had attacked while I was away. I quickly finished arranging things with the villagers and had Alice race me back. At the camp, Mou had launched an all-out assault. She summoned waves of monsters and tried once more to manipulate Ilena's mind, whispering that she should betray Midia to keep me for herself. But Ilena shut her down cold. She said what she wanted was companionship, not possession. She stayed by my side by choice, not to own me. Ilena protected Midia and cast healing spells on the knights and followers, erasing their wounds and fatigue instantly. Tai led the counterattack, slaughtering the summoned creatures. Then Midia surprised everyone. She could sense Mou's location because of the magic Mou had once used to seal her. She pointed to where Mou was hiding. Tai threw a torch, exposing her. Ilena tried to cast the binding spell, but Mou fled before it could take hold. Alice and I arrived right after the fighting ended. Everyone was safe. They apologized for letting Mou escape. I told them to stop worrying. She was just one demon woman. I told everyone to rest up for tomorrow's march. Midia noticed Alice and tensed up immediately. The golden armor, the title, Holy Light Knight. It all reminded her of the Holy Temple, which hunted demon women like her. I assured her Alice was mine and wouldn't hurt her. Alice gave a small nod of confirmation, but said nothing. Midia was amazed, a temple-type knight serving alongside a demon woman princess without conflict. She lay down wondering what kind of nation I'd come from to command such loyalty from such different people. The next morning, Ilena healed Tai and the injured followers. Our group now numbered 32, 9 knights, 20 followers, Ilena, Midia, and me. What I didn't know was that news of what happened in Aoyu town had already reached Dana City. The local lord, Count Bazin, had 5 knights and 200 soldiers, far stronger than Roland. His advisors warned him I was dangerous and that even Mou had suffered losses against me. They worried about ending up like Roland's family. Bazin wasn't afraid, though. He said Dana City wasn't some backwater town, and he wasn't a weakling like Roland. He planned to welcome Midia properly. He wasn't stupid enough to refuse a princess entry. But as for me, he had other plans. A church deacon happened to be visiting the city. Bazin intended to have this religious authority deal with me and put me in my place. I expected trouble at Dana City, but when we arrived the gates were wide open. Count Bazin himself was waiting outside to greet us. He welcomed Midia warmly and eyed my group, 8 knights, 20 followers, and especially Alice in her golden armor. He seemed to recognize the religious symbols on her gear and got visibly nervous. Then 3 men in church robes walked out. The leader, a church deacon named Sfer, greeted Midia politely. Everything seemed friendly at first. Then Sfer turned to me with a cold expression. He accused me of crimes, killing Baron Roland's entire family, violating divine law that forbade killing nobles, and harboring a witch. He pointed straight at Ilena. She trembled. A church deacon held enormous authority in this kingdom. Even nobles had to show respect. Midia tried to defend me, but Sfer cut her off every time. He asked if she was protecting a heretic. When she tried to explain that Ilena was different, he shut her down again and declared me guilty. I laughed, loudly. Bazin thought I'd lost my mind from fear. He pulled Midia to his side, saying she shouldn't be near a condemned man. Midia was furious, but I gave her a look, and she stayed quiet. Sfer asked why I was laughing. I told him, because he was stupid. His priests were outraged that I'd insulted a deacon. I didn't care. I asked him who gave a lowly preacher the right to speak for God. He was nobody. Then I flipped everything on him. I said he was clearly Roland's accomplice. Roland had slandered the princess and refused her entry. That was treason. Now Sfer was defending Roland and using the church to frame me. That made him a traitor too, trying to overthrow Lane Kingdom using religion as a cover. Sfer stammered that harboring a witch was proof enough against me. I shot back. What had witches ever done to him? Did a witch eat his food? Kill his mother? He was inventing crimes. The real crime was using fake charges to destabilize the kingdom. I didn't wait for more arguments. I ordered Tai-E to arrest Sfer and his 2 priests, then find any accomplices in the city. Traitors would be executed. Midia's face went pale. She knew I was doing my thing again, labeling everyone as rebels and cutting them down. Worse, Sfer was a church official. Killing him would make enemies of the entire church. But I didn't give anyone time to react. Tai grabbed all 3 churchmen. Tai walked up to Bazin and asked him to identify any other conspirators. Bazin's face changed. He said they were church people and I couldn't just kill them. I corrected him. They were traitors. Then I asked him directly, was he defending traitors too? Did he also think Roland was innocent? Did he think I was really a heretic? He backed into a corner with no good answer. Bazin panicked and tried to backtrack. He couldn't call me a heretic. I'd rescued the princess. I twisted his words easily. I said since Bazin himself disagreed with Sfer, that proved Sfer was lying and plotting treason. Before anyone could argue further, I ordered Tai-E to execute Sfer on the spot. One swing. Head gone. Right there at the city gates. Bazin went pale. The other 2 priests lost control of their bladders. They begged for their lives and immediately offered to lead us to the church's headquarters in the city. I sent Tai with knights and followers to raid it. I interrogated the remaining priest. I asked who put Sfer up to confronting me. The priest said Bazin's steward had visited that morning and told the church about my group, including that I had a witch with me. Bazin exploded, denying everything. But I pointed out calmly that the priest only mentioned his steward, not him personally. Why was he so defensive? I looked at Midia and laid it out. The church could condemn anyone as a heretic without evidence, just on someone's word. Today I was strong enough to survive it. But how many ordinary people had been killed the same way? This kind of power was designed to control the kingdom. That was treason. Midia went quiet. I could see her starting to agree with me. I told Bazin to hand over his steward. He resisted, but I cornered him. If he refused, it meant he'd ordered it himself. That would make him the traitor. Midia backed me up and asked Bazin directly to turn the man over. He had no choice. He was outnumbered, 2 knights against my 6 at the gate. He sent for the steward, but his own knight reported that the steward had tried to flee and been killed on the spot. Convenient. The evidence died with him. I let it go. The man was dead either way. Bazin invited us inside for a banquet, forcing a smile. I made sure to keep Midia close to my group instead of his. He didn't like it, but couldn't complain. Then Tai returned from the church headquarters with a grim expression. He said I needed to see something personally. I invited Midia and Bazin to come along. What we found silenced everyone. In the church building, Tai showed us the remains of young girls. The church members had been cutting them apart, claiming it was to create magical weapons against demon women. In the basement, 12 girls were still alive, locked in cells. Every one of them was mutilated. Missing hands. Missing feet. One had her eyes gouged out. Even Bazin vomited at the sight. Midia stared in horror. The church that preached justice and righteousness had been doing this in secret. She looked at the girls and whispered that they were pitiful. I was furious. I ordered Tai to search every corner of Dana City. Not a single church member was to escape. They all had to die. This time Midia didn't stop me. Even Bazin stayed silent. Midia asked what would happen to the mutilated girls. I looked at them. Their eyes were empty, completely broken. I called Eilina over and asked if she could heal them. She said yes, but it would take time since their bodies were so badly damaged. When Eilina started casting her healing magic, Bazin and his people backed away. They whispered nervously, a witch. In this kingdom, witches were forbidden just like demon women. Bazin admitted he wasn't afraid of Eilina herself, but of the Holy Temple's decree that all witches must be burned. He pointed at Alice, saying she was clearly from the temple and should understand his position. Alice turned her cold gaze on him and asked 2 simple questions. Was Eilina hurting people or saving them? Saving. Was she good or evil? Good. Then Alice looked away. Answer given. Bazin wiped the sweat off his forehead and excused himself. I went downstairs with Tyre. The church's basement was full of treasure, boxes of gold coins, and at least 50,000 pounds of grain. A small outpost richer than Baron Roland's entire estate. Tyre counted at least 10,000 gold coins. I swept everything into my storage space with a wave of my hand. When I came back upstairs, some of the girls were already regrowing their hands and feet. One could see again. They were amazed and grateful to Eilina, though still wary of me. I told them they were free now. Once healed, I'd send them home. They worried the church would come back for them. I told them those monsters wouldn't be hurting anyone ever again. Tai reported that every church member in Dana City had been captured. I had the doors thrown open and the prisoners dragged into the public square. I wanted the people of the city to see for themselves. I stood before the crowd and told them everything. Who I was, what the church had done to those girls, how they'd been kidnapped, dismembered, and tortured by men who claimed to serve God. I asked them how many other children had disappeared the same way. Did they want their own sons and daughters to end up like this? The crowd was silent at first, but I could see the rage building in their eyes. I declared the prisoners would be executed on the spot. No one objected. Tai and my knights started the chant, "Kill, kill, kill." The crowd joined in, their voices shaking the air. I gave the order. Every church member lost their head. The people weren't horrified. They were relieved. These priests had never been kind to commoners either. Eilina finished healing all the girls, and I had them escorted home. Word spread through Dana City about what I'd done and about the kind which would save those girls. People started to realize that maybe witches weren't the monsters they'd been told about. Only Bazin was worried. He knew killing church members would bring consequences. His advisor suggested a clever move: report everything to both the church and the king, blaming me and the princess for all the killings. That way Bazin's hands would be clean. They'd also mention the witch in my group, knowing the church would want that information. But they left Alice out of the report. Bazin didn't want to provoke anyone connected to the temple. Nobody else came looking for trouble that night, which was actually disappointing. That church outpost had been loaded with treasure. Imagine what the noble families were sitting on. I could use every coin and grain for building my future territory, but no one gave me an excuse to raid them. At midnight, I summoned again 2 more heavy knights. My total was now 11. These knights were the foundation of everything I planned to build. Alice refused to stop guarding my door. I finally convinced her to at least sleep on a mattress nearby, so she could react quickly if anything happened. Having a loyal, beautiful bodyguard made sleeping in this foreign world feel surprisingly comfortable. The next morning, Bazin saw us off at the gates, shaking my hand and talking about drinking together next time. I smiled and played along, but my gut told me this man was rotten. No rush, though. I'd deal with him eventually. The road from Dana City to the capital was flat, open grassland. I'd bought several horse-drawn carts in town, so everyone could ride instead of walk. We covered 2 days' distance in one. When the royal city appeared on the horizon, Eilina gasped at how beautiful it was. Even I had to admit the foreign architecture was impressive. Midia teared up. She hadn't seen her hometown in 10 years. At the gates, an elderly official named Isekai'd was waiting. He was the Minister of Internal Affairs, sent by the king himself. Midia recognized him immediately and called him Uncle Isekai'd. He'd aged considerably in 10 years. He glanced at my knights and followers with a knowing smile, then led us inside. At the palace, I could only bring 2 knights and 1 attendant, so I chose Alice, Tai, and Eilina. King Lancelane rushed to Midia the moment we entered. Father and daughter reunited after a decade. They talked for a long time before he finally turned to me. He recognized that I came from the mysterious East, across dangerous mountains and vast oceans. He acknowledged my achievement and said the bounty entitled me to a count's title and territory. Then he hesitated. I tensed up, not another cliffhanger. He explained that in 10 years, the church had seized most of the kingdom's power. Even the chief knight of the army, Knight Owen, was loyal to the church rather than the crown. The king could only control his palace guard. Without church approval, his orders couldn't even reach beyond the capital walls. He was a puppet king. He said he could only give me a tiny piece of land still under his personal control, barely bigger than a village. Far less than what a count deserved. He looked embarrassed. Midia tried to calm me down, warning that the church was too dangerous to challenge. But I looked straight at the king and asked him one question. Did he want to break free from the church's control? He stared at me, Confused, I told him plainly. The church was acting no different from traitors who'd stolen his kingdom. If he'd let me, I would restore order on his behalf and give his kingdom back to him. I'd already killed church members before. This was nothing new. My territory was at stake, and I wasn't backing down. I pressed King Lance. He was a king, not a puppet. Did he really want to live under the church's thumb forever? He hesitated, worried about the holy temple behind the church. I told him the church had crossed the line by meddling in politics. Then Midia told him what we'd found in Dana City. The mutilated girls, the torture. His face darkened. He was still worried. The church's enforcer, Knight Commander Owen, had 15 knights and 500 soldiers. A direct clash could backfire. I told him we had to strike fast before they could react. Hit them like lightning. I made him a deal. Give me full authority to handle the church. If I succeeded, he'd let me choose my own territory. If I failed, he could blame everything on me. He pulled his advisor Isekai'd aside for a quick conversation, then came back with fire in his eyes. He agreed. He even gave me command of his palace guard. We were all in together. I liked that. If he'd been a total coward, I would have just taken the kingdom by force. But he had some spine. I refused to wait until morning. Every hour gave the church time to prepare. I asked for their location and moved immediately. Meanwhile, at the church headquarters, I didn't know the full picture yet. But here's what was happening. The bishop had gathered his deacons to discuss how to deal with me. Their plan was simple. Have Knight Commander Owen arrest me at the palace where I only had 2 knights, then burn me and Ilena alive in a public execution. Then Mou appeared right in the middle of their meeting. A demon woman walking into a room full of church leaders, and none of them panicked. They were clearly working together. The bishop tried to dismiss her, but she dropped the bombshell. I'd already made a deal with the king and was marching toward the church right now with my knights and the palace guard. That got their attention. Mou offered a trade. She'd use her teleportation magic to bring Owen and his entire army directly to the church, bypassing my surprise attack. In exchange, she wanted Princess Midia. The bishop agreed without hesitation. He traded a princess like she was worthless furniture. Mou opened a massive portal. Owen stepped through with 10 knights and 300 soldiers. Then she vanished. Owen was confused about why a demon woman had been there and what deal the bishop had mentioned. The bishop brushed it off, showed him Bazin's report about me killing church members and harboring a witch, and told him the king had been corrupted by a heretic. Owen didn't need much convincing. He was a true believer. He declared that heretics must be destroyed and promised no one would touch the bishop today. So while I was racing toward the church thinking I had the element of surprise, they were already waiting for me with a full army inside. As we approached the church, Alice suddenly warned me she sensed demon woman energy, and it was coming from inside the church itself. It was the same signature as Mou from the forest. So the church preached about destroying demon women while secretly working with one. Everything clicked. The church's bishop was the wise man who'd suppressed Midia's cursed magic years ago. They knew about her curse all along. And then Mou had conveniently shown up to seal Midia in the castle. The church and Mou had been connected from the start. I ordered everyone to charge at full speed. But when we arrived, the church was already fortified with soldiers waiting for us. Mou had tipped them off. It didn't matter. I had 10 heavy knights, 20 followers, plus the king's 5 palace knights and 200 soldiers. I told them to attack. Tai led the charge. There were no walls to hide behind. This was open combat. Owen's soldiers met us head-on, but my knights were simply stronger. Their massive blades dented enemy armor with every swing, even when they couldn't cut through. My system-summoned knights instinctively knew how to fight armored opponents, use blunt force. Owen's elite soldiers crumbled. Owen realized they were losing and suggested the bishop retreat. But the bishop refused. Instead, he pulled out a staff from beneath his throne, a horrifying thing with a human head on top and eyes covering the shaft. Dark magic radiated from it. It was made from the bodies of those kidnapped girls. Owen was disgusted and demanded the bishop destroy it. The bishop laughed and pointed the staff at Owen instead. Black energy engulfed him instantly. Owen went silent, his eyes turned blood red, and he became a mindless puppet under the bishop's control. Tai Yi's group finished the remaining soldiers and burst into the main hall. They immediately saw what had happened. Tai Yi charged at the puppet Owen, but something was wrong. Owen's strength had doubled, maybe tripled. One blow sent Tai flying backward. The bishop was ecstatic. He ordered Owen to kill everyone. Even when Tai and 3 other knights attacked together, Owen fought them off easily. He felt no pain and followed only the bishop's commands. One of my knights went down. The bishop laughed and raved about his plans. Make more puppets, control everything, until the church was the only voice in Lane Kingdom. All my knights rushed Owen at once. They managed to land some hits and even counterattack, but Owen shrugged off every blow and knocked another knight out of the fight. The bishop declared it was over for us. That's when I walked in. Elena immediately started healing the injured knights. I looked at the scene. The bishop holding his grotesque staff made from murdered girls, the puppet Owen, the madness in the bishop's eyes, and told him I'd underestimated just how evil the church truly was. The bishop sneered. He said the church was God, the church was justice. Then he pointed at me and ordered Owen to kill me. Owen charged at me with terrifying speed and power, but Alice stepped in front of me. She blocked his attack with her golden sword and sent him flying backward. The bishop was horrified. Alice announced herself as a holy light knight and declared judgment on him for harming the weak, deceiving the gods, and attacking her master. The bishop noticed the sacred symbols on her armor, the same ones only the legendary Round Table Knights were allowed to wear. He panicked, but knew his only chance was to kill her. He blasted dark magic from his staff, but Alice raised her sword and unleashed something called Holy Light Judgment. The dark energy vanished instantly. She closed the distance in a flash and drove her blade through his heart. He died wondering how a temple knight had appeared here. The staff crumbled and turned into golden light that streaked across the sky. I thought I could see the faces of all the girls whose bodies had been used to make it. They were finally free. Owen snapped back to normal. The puppet spell broke with the bishop's death. He knelt before Alice and thanked her, but I wasn't feeling generous. I had Tai disarm him and remove his helmet. I told him he was under arrest. He'd served as the kingdom's top knight, yet worked for the church against his own king. That was treason, punishable by death. He argued he'd acted for God in faith. I laughed and told him I'd send him to meet his God personally. Then I announced to all the captured soldiers and knights that they'd betrayed their king. By law, they and their families would be executed. Owen begged me to spare the families. They were innocent. He called me a demon. I pointed out that his beloved church had butchered girls to make magic weapons. Who was the real demon? I ordered Tai to execute Owen. Done. The captured soldiers were hysterical, begging for mercy. I gave them a deal. Bring me a church member or lead me to church treasure within 1 day, and that person lives. Anyone who couldn't deliver something useful would die. No one was leaving the city. Gates closed, entry only. I released them and started inventorying the church's wealth. 100,000 gold coins. 100,000 pounds of grain. Countless jewels. All stored away. Then we found the basement. 30 more girls imprisoned, plus piles of bodies. My blood boiled. Killing these church people had been too merciful. Tai rushed in to report that crowds had gathered outside. Commoners and nobles, demanding I release the church members and apologize to God. I went out to meet them. Over 1,000 people were chanting, "The church is innocent," led by about a dozen nobles at the front. One noble, named Coffee Bell, stepped forward, demanding I explain why I'd attacked the church. He said no law or doctrine permitted it. I asked if he was defending the church. He proudly said yes. The church represented God and justice. I didn't bother explaining. I ordered my knights to arrest him and seize his family's assets. Another noble, Fox Warren, protested. He said his family were counts and that God's will couldn't be defied. I picked my ear, told my men to arrest him too. Same treatment as the Bell family. 2 nobles arrested in a row, and I didn't even blink. The crowd went dead silent. Everyone was afraid they'd be next. I changed my approach. Instead of arguing, I invited everyone inside the church to see for themselves. I told them anyone could enter, even beggars from the riverbank. I had people line up single file and walk through the basement one by one. They went in excited and curious. They came out silent and pale. Even the remaining nobles had nothing to say after seeing the girls' bodies and the prisoners. When everyone had seen the truth, I asked again, should I release the church members? Should I apologize? Or should these monsters who treated children like garbage be executed? The crowd erupted. Kill them. Kill them. Just like in Dana City, the people's anger did my work for me. The nobles who still had complaints swallowed them. That day, the royal city ran red with blood, but the people cheered for every execution. Mou watched everything from the shadows. Her plan to use the church as a distraction while she stole Midia had completely failed. She admitted she had no way to fight me now, especially not with Alice, who was her natural counter. She slipped away from the city, vowing to return once she could summon a demon dragon on her own. At the palace, King Lance was conflicted. He was glad the church was gone, but terrified of retaliation from the Holy Temple. The church's parent organization wouldn't just let an entire branch disappear. They'd send powerful knights to punish Lane Kingdom. Then I walked in and delivered my report. 312 church conspirators eliminated, no survivors. Those who cooperated by turning in others were spared. 5 territories reclaimed for the crown. Massive amounts of treasure seized. I handed the king a full written record of the church's crimes and asked him to publish it nationwide. Lance read it, took a deep breath, and said I'd done the right thing. Midia was confused. He'd just been worrying about temple revenge a minute ago. But the documented horrors were too extreme to ignore. He told me to rest and promised to prepare territory options for me by tomorrow. I reminded him of his promise. I got to choose my own land. He agreed. He gave me a luxurious estate that used to be the king's personal retreat. It had everything: full living quarters, a swimming pool fed by natural hot springs. The king hadn't visited since his wife died. Now it was mine. For everything I'd done today, this was the least they could offer. I told everyone to wash up and rest. Eilina had been the real hero. Her healing kept every single one of my people alive through the battle. She offered to heat water for me, but I told her to take care of herself first. Alice, predictably, refused to leave my side. She stood in front of me like a statue, insisting on guard duty. I grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the bathing room. She stammered in surprise. I told her she'd been sweating all day and I didn't like the smell. I finally got to relax properly. The estate had a swimming pool fed by natural hot springs, and I soaked in it for what felt like hours. After days of traveling and fighting, I deserved this. While I floated in the warm water, I decided to take stock of everything I had. My storage space was loaded. 300,000 pounds of grain. Between Hou Town, Dana City, and the church raid, plus those 2 noble families I'd seized, I had around 200,000 gold coins. And that was after splitting half with the king. There were jewels too, small stuff, but worth something if I sold them. My forces had grown nicely. 10 heavy cavalry knights from the system, Alice the Holy Light Knight, Eilina my healer witch, and 20 followers. Once I picked my territory and the system registered it, I was hoping for some kind of bonus. Though knowing my glitchy system, it might just sputter and die again. I was a little annoyed that wiping out the entire church branch hadn't triggered any system reward. You'd think destroying a national religious institution would count for something. Cheap system. Alice announced that Princess Midia had come to visit. I told her to let Midia in. I was still in the pool, but I had shorts on, nothing inappropriate. Still, when Midia walked in and saw me, her cheeks turned pink and her eyes wandered a bit. I teased her about coming to stare at me. She got flustered and shot back that she wasn't bad-looking herself, so I wasn't losing anything. I told her to look all she wanted and spread my arms wide. Her face went even redder. She quickly changed the subject. She said her father believed that staying with me would help her learn to control her magic, since I had Eilina to teach her and I didn't discriminate against witches or demon women. King Lance wanted her to come live at my territory. I was surprised but not opposed. Having a princess around was useful, but I pointed out a problem. What identity would she have? A princess living at a lord's estate was strange. The only way it would make sense was if she married the lord. I said it casually, almost as a joke. But Midia froze completely. Even Alice at the door sneaked a glance at us. After a long pause, Midia said she did have feelings for me, but she wasn't ready to decide about marriage yet. That caught me off guard. I'd been teasing, but she took it seriously. I stood up and asked if she was being real. She looked confused about what I meant. I sat back down and told her to forget it. She could follow me without marrying me, no problem. A beautiful woman tagging along was never something I'd refuse. But Midia shook her head. She said I'd made a good point about needing a proper identity. She left to discuss it with her father. I sat there processing what just happened. I'd been joking, but she basically admitted she liked me and was now going to ask her father about marriage arrangements. The thing was, my long-term plan involved conquering this entire continent, including Lane Kingdom. If I married the princess and then took over her father's kingdom, that would be awkward. Fighting your father-in-law isn't exactly honorable. I decided not to worry about it. Even if Lance agreed, I wouldn't let a woman change my plans. I got dressed and headed for the door. Alice was looking at me strangely. I asked her what was wrong. She snapped back to her serious expression and said nothing. Protecting me was her only mission. I could tell something was on her mind, but she was system-summoned and absolutely loyal. She'd never betray me. I let it go. That night, I slept so deeply I missed midnight entirely and forgot to summon. When I woke up the next morning, I immediately used the system. 2 more heavy nights. My army kept growing stronger every day. Alate was already waiting outside with a carriage. I told him he didn't need to escort me everywhere, but he insisted it was his duty. We rode to the palace. King Lance had a map spread out on a table. He told me to pick any unmarked territory as my domain. After yesterday's battle, quite a few areas had been reclaimed from church control, so there were options. Lane Kingdom had 4 cities and 10 towns, stretching across a wide area with a mountain range running from the capital all the way to Eilena's old village. I studied the map carefully. I immediately ruled out anything in the center. I wasn't looking for a quiet, safe place to settle down. I needed a border territory, somewhere I could fight, expand, and grow through conquest. War was fuel for my ambitions. That left 2 options. The northern border touched the Hill Kingdom, which was 10 times larger than Lane Kingdom. Starting a war with them right now would be suicidal. Not yet. The western border was different. There sat a territory called Twin Towers City, named for 2 highlands within its borders. Beyond it lay the joint military defense line against the Beastman tribes. This was the frontier, dangerous, but full of opportunity. I pointed to Twin Towers City. Lance immediately tried to talk me out of it. He said the western border was constantly under threat. Even with the Allied defense line, Beastman raiding parties broke through over a dozen times every year. It was the most dangerous territory in the kingdom. He suggested I pick something closer to the capital instead. I told him not to worry. I'd chosen this place deliberately. As long as I was there, any beastman that crossed the line would find only death waiting for them. What I didn't say out loud was that I wanted those fights. Every battle meant captured resources, territory expansion, and combat experience for my growing army. Twin Towers City wasn't a risk. It was the perfect launchpad for everything I planned to build. King Lance could see I was set on my choice. He didn't try to stop me, but he brought up his daughter. He said if I picked Twin Towers City, he couldn't let Midia marry me, at least not right now. The place was too dangerous for a princess. I was caught off guard. Midia had actually gone to her father about the marriage thing, and Lance was apparently willing to agree, just not if I chose a dangerous border territory. The implication was clear. Pick a safer location and the princess was mine. But I wasn't doing any of this for Midia. I needed the right territory for my plans. I told Lance I understood his concern, but Twin Tower City was exactly where I needed to be. The kingdom had been held back for years by useless people like Owen and corrupt institutions like the church. If I fortified the western border, it would give the entire kingdom breathing room and let him focus on governing properly. Lance was moved by that. He admitted none of his other nobles or ministers had ever shown that kind of dedication. After thinking it over, he made me a promise. If I could stabilize Twin Tower City, he'd still be willing to give me Midia's hand. He believed she'd wait for me. I smiled, but didn't respond to the marriage part. I had bigger things on my mind. He handed me 3 items: a land contract for Twin Towers City, a charter granting me full authority as its lord, and a seal that proved my identity as the legitimate ruler. Without these, nobody in the city would accept me. He also mentioned that a knight named Trenton was currently managing Twin Towers City on the kingdom's behalf. Lance said Trenton was capable and had dealt with Beastman invasions before. He suggested I consult with him if I ran into problems. I agreed. As long as Trenton didn't cause trouble on my land, I could find a use for him. With everything I needed in hand, I gathered my people and left without saying goodbye to Midia. Farewells always made things harder, and I didn't want the emotional weight slowing me down. Alice told me Midia was watching from the castle walls. I didn't look back. Instead, I asked Alice how she could possibly notice the princess all the way up there while supposedly guarding me. She answered innocently that tracking the princess's location didn't interfere with protecting me at all. I told her fine, she won that round. Eilina laughed quietly behind us. She said she'd never seen this playful side of me before, and she seemed surprised that Alice, who looked so cold and serious, had such a human side to her. We traveled fast this time. Everyone had horses now, even the regular followers. Not war horses, but decent enough to double our speed. The kingdom really was small. What would have taken months back in my old world took us barely a day. We reached Finland town by evening. It was similar to Isekai'd town but larger, probably because of its proximity to the border. Trade seemed more active here. I decided we'd spend the night and continue to Twin Tower City in the morning. What I didn't know was that Finland town's lord, Tinglan Moore, was already nervous about my arrival. Word of what I'd done in the capital had spread, killing the church, executing nobles, wiping out entire families. He called me a demon. His advisor suggested we'd probably leave peacefully if nobody provoked us, and Tinglan agreed he wouldn't start anything. But Tinglan had another worry. He did extensive business with Trenton, the knight managing Twin Towers City. If Trenton clashed with me, Finland town could get caught in the crossfire. He sent a messenger to warn Trenton that his new lord was coming and to suggest he tone things down. At the inn, Eilina sat across from me and carefully arranged the dinner she'd prepared. She apologized that the food was simple. I told her it wasn't as good as her own cooking, but she shouldn't waste her healing hands on kitchen work. She said sweetly that nobody was injured every day, so she might as well take care of me in other ways. She pointed out that my knights were all rough men who couldn't look after anyone properly. Alice chimed in from the doorway, saying she wasn't a rough man. Her face was completely serious, but the comment was almost funny coming from someone who looked like an ice-cold warrior queen. She'd clearly been listening to our entire conversation, catching every word related to me. Eilina handled it smoothly. She said Alice was responsible for protecting me, and she was responsible for taking care of me. A perfect division of labor. Alice went quiet, apparently accepting the arrangement. After dinner, Eilina left to clean up the dishes. That's when she overheard something that made her freeze. Two men were whispering nearby. They were talking about Trenton being the true master of Twin Tower City and calling me some wild nobody who had no right to take his position. They mentioned a plan. They'd poison the horse feed at the stable. By the time we reached Twin Tower City tomorrow, all our horses would be too sick to move. That would leave us weakened and let Trenton show his authority right from the start. They said not to worry about my knights since this was Finland town, their home turf. They figured the scheme was safe here. One of them insisted on staying to watch the horses eat the tainted feed before leaving, just to make sure. Eilina crept out after they passed and followed them quietly. Sure enough, the two men went straight to the stable. They pulled out packets of powder and mixed it into the horse feed. Then they grabbed the feed buckets and headed toward our horses, determined to watch every animal eat the poisoned grain before they'd be satisfied. Eilina watched from the shadows, her eyes narrowing. She'd found the threat. Now she just needed to decide what to do about it. Eilina had spotted the saboteurs, but she handled it quietly. She didn't confront them or raise an alarm. She simply waited for them to leave, then cast her healing magic on the horse feed to neutralize whatever poison they'd mixed in. Then she stayed right there by the stable, worried they might come back and try again. I found her around midnight. I'd woken up to relieve myself and noticed a small figure slumped against the wall near the horses, barely keeping her eyes open. It was Eilina. She told me everything. The two men whispering about Trenton being the real master of Twin Towers City, the plan to drug our horses so they'd collapse on the road, and how she'd been guarding the stable ever since. I didn't know what to say. This girl had been with me since the very beginning, and here she was losing sleep just to protect my horses from some petty scheme. I told her she could just cast her healing spell again in the morning and let my men take overguard duty for the night. She looked at me like I'd just invented fire, amazed she hadn't thought of something so simple. I sent her off to bed, but the incident told me plenty about Trenton. King Lance had mentioned that Twin Tower City faced over a dozen Beastman raids every year, yet Trenton always came through unscathed. That didn't add up. There had to be some kind of deal between him and the Beastmen. And now his people were trying to sabotage me before I even arrived. If Trenton turned out to be a traitor, I'd have no problem cutting him down. Before sleeping, I summoned my nightly knights. 2 more heavy cavalry. My force kept growing steadily. At this rate, within a year I'd have over 1,000 heavy riders, enough to crush most kingdoms in this world of swords and shields. The next morning, we restocked supplies in Finland town and rode out. The men who'd poisoned the feed were probably watching us leave, confident their drug would kick in later. They had no idea Elena had already fixed everything. Twin Towers City's territory was impressive. 3 towns worth of land under one jurisdiction. As we crossed into its borders, I could see endless farmland stretching out, with wide grasslands beyond. Near the forests, clusters of houses appeared here and there. Everything looked peaceful on the surface. After 2 more hours of riding, the city itself came into view. It was built beside a large lake, surrounded by tall stone walls. Inside the walls rose buildings of various sizes, and at the center stood a magnificent castle, a proper medieval fortress, far grander than Princess Midia's old castle in the forest. This was going to be my home. My followers gasped at the sight. I stayed quiet and checked my system panel. The territory slot was still empty. I remembered it had activated at the Lord's Hall back in Aoyu town, so I probably needed to enter the castle here before the system would register it. At the city gates, crowds of citizens lined both sides of the road. In the center stood a tall knight, with 4 more knights behind him. He introduced himself as Knight Commander Trenton and welcomed me formally. I smiled but didn't play along. I asked him if these citizens had actually come willingly or if he'd arranged this little show. He claimed they'd gathered on their own to see their new lord. I asked if maybe they were actually here to watch me make a fool of myself. His face twitched. He could clearly see our horses were perfectly healthy and energetic. His sabotage plan had completely failed. He recovered quickly and suggested we head to the castle. I told him to wait. I looked at the people lining the road. Their eyes were dull, fearful, not a trace of respect or hope in their faces. These people were not living well under Trenton's management. I stepped forward and introduced myself. I told them I was Count Zhuanghua, their new lord. I said I'd review all existing policies later, but right now I had a gift. Every citizen who came to the castle square within 30 minutes would receive 1 pound of grain. Everyone, no exceptions. The crowd erupted in shock. One brave soul shouted and asked if I was joking. I told him it was real. And if anyone tried to stop them from collecting their share, they could report it to my Knight Commander Tai E, who would personally cut off the offender's head as an apology. Nobody dared respond to that. Behind me, Trenton's mouth was twitching again. Twin Tower City had at least 5,000 people. That was 5,000 pounds of grain just given away. He probably thought I was insane. But winning the people's hearts was worth far more than a few thousand pounds of food. Inside the castle, the moment I stepped into the Great Hall, my system lit up. It detected an unclaimed territory and verified my legal documents. I confirmed Twin Tower City as my official domain. The Lord system fully activated for the first time. Then came the glitching, the usual crackling and error sounds. I held my breath, praying my rewards wouldn't vanish again. But this time the system stabilized. It gave me 2 things, a new talent called Talent Recruitment and a starter gift pack. The gift pack contained an iron mine, a workshop, and 10 craftsmen. That was essentially a complete weapons factory, raw materials, production facility, and skilled workers, all in one package. For someone building a military force from scratch, this was perfect. I pulled up my updated system panel. My territory was now registered as Twin Tower City. Prosperity rating sat at 0, which made sense since I'd just arrived. My talents now showed 2 abilities, Knight Summoning and Talent Recruitment. The system also had a building section showing my new workshop. A note at the bottom said more features would unlock as my prosperity rating increased. Finally, the system was becoming what it was supposed to be. Not just a daily night dispenser, but a real Lord management tool. I'd always known it had more potential. The glitches had just been holding everything back. Trenton tried to start talking again, probably wanting to establish his authority. I cut him off. I wasn't ready to deal with him yet. First, I needed to understand exactly what my new system features could do. I smiled to myself. The Lord system had finally woken up properly, and Twin Tower City was just the beginning. The system's new talent recruitment feature let me summon 1 special person per week. I used it right away. A flash of white light, and a man in a green robe appeared before me. He introduced himself as Xiao He. The name hit me immediately, the same name as one of the greatest administrators in ancient Chinese history. But he quickly clarified he wasn't that Xiao He, just someone with the same name. He promised his abilities wouldn't disappoint me though. System products were always quality, so I believed him. I suddenly realized Trenton had been standing right there when I summoned Xiaohe. I tensed up, wondering if he'd seen the whole thing, a man appearing from thin air. But when I tested him, he acted completely normal, asking about lunch and work reports. Either the system had blocked his perception, or he genuinely hadn't noticed. Either way, I was relieved. The last thing I needed was people thinking I was possessed by demons. Trenton started his report. Twin Towers City had 13,000 people total, 5,500 inside the walls, and 7,500 outside. Then he got to the part I'd been waiting for. He claimed the city's food stores were nearly empty because they had to pay the Allied defense line soldiers with grain and gold every time beastmen attacked. He said if I insisted on giving food to the citizens, there wouldn't be enough. I saw right through it. A territory this large with farmland stretching to the horizon, and he was telling me they couldn't spare 5,000 pounds of grain? He was trying to make me break my promise to the people on my very first day. Classic power play. I cut him off and stripped him of all administrative authority on the spot. From that moment, Xiaohe would handle every aspect of the city's internal affairs. Trenton tried to protest, saying the city's politics were complicated and he was needed. I stared him down and told him his job was military defense, nothing else. Internal matters were none of his business. Was that clear enough? He backed down, but I could see the defiance in his eyes. He thought without his cooperation, nobody in the city would listen to me. He'd learn how wrong he was soon enough. I officially appointed Xiaohe as Minister of Internal Affairs for Twin Towers City, gave him 2 heavy knights and 4 followers as enforcement, and authorized him to execute any official who refused to cooperate. No need to ask my permission first. Xiaohe accepted calmly and left to carry out his first task: inventory the warehouses and have at least 10,000 pounds of grain ready in the square. He didn't ask where the grain would come from. He didn't question anything. He just smiled and went to work. That confidence told me everything I needed to know about his competence. Then I turned back to Trenton and asked about the military situation. As a border city facing Beastman territory, Twin Towers City naturally had its own army. 500 soldiers total, 5 knights including Trenton, 100 swordsmen, 200 spearmen, and 200 archers. Trenton claimed proudly that this force was the kingdom's finest, even better than Owen's royal guard back in the capital. I asked him a simple question. If they were so elite, why couldn't they stop the Beastmen? He mumbled something about Beastmen being too strong and needing allied reinforcements to drive them back. I filed that away and didn't push further. Not yet. Elena came in and told me the citizens had gathered in the square. When we walked outside, Trenton's jaw nearly dropped. Mountains of grain were piled up in the square, and every single city official was standing at attention with fear in their eyes. Xiaohe had already taken control. Whatever he'd done in those few minutes had been enough to bring the entire bureaucracy in line. I climbed the platform overlooking the square and addressed the crowd. I introduced myself as their new lord, Count Zhuanghua. I pointed to the grain and told them it was their welcome gift, just as I'd promised. The people's eyes lit up and they cheered. But before the distribution, I told them I had some questions. A lord asking commoners for their opinions was apparently unheard of. An old man stepped forward nervously and said they were just ignorant peasants who probably couldn't answer a noble's questions. I told them to relax. I only wanted to hear about things they'd personally seen and experienced. I asked my first question. I'd heard Twin Towers City was invaded by beastmen over a dozen times each year. Was that true? The old man looked puzzled. He said beastmen did come, but a dozen times was a huge exaggeration. It was more like 2 or 3 times a year, with only about 10 beastmen each time. Nothing catastrophic. Interesting. Trenton had reported the same inflated numbers that King Lance had received. Someone had been lying to the crown for years, probably to justify demanding more resources and keeping the excess. I asked my second question. I'd also heard that Allied defense forces came to help repel the beastmen each time. Had anyone actually seen these reinforcements? The old man was about to answer when Trenton suddenly interrupted. He said these commoners were ignorant, and I should ask him directly instead. I turned and looked at him coldly. I told him to shut his mouth. I was asking the citizens, not him. Did he understand? The square went dead silent. Every eye shifted between me and Trenton. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Trenton's face darkened, but he said nothing. He knew that with my knights standing right behind me, making a scene would only end badly for him. I turned back to the old man and waited for his answer. The truth about Twin Tower City was about to come out, and Trenton knew it. Every lie he'd told the kingdom, every coin he'd pocketed, every deal he'd made with the beast men. It was all going to unravel right here in this square, in front of the very people he'd been exploiting for years. I could feel it. This was going to be satisfying. Trenton was humiliated. Being scolded in front of the very people he'd ruled over for years was clearly unbearable for him. But with my knights standing right behind me, he had no choice but to swallow his pride. He muttered that he understood. I told him to get lost and stand aside. The citizens saw their once untouchable knight commander being treated like a dog, and that opened the floodgates. They started talking. One person said they'd never seen any allied reinforcements come to help, but the officials had used that excuse to collect extra taxes for years. Another said the farmland outside the city was rich and productive, but after paying all the different taxes, ordinary families had nothing left to eat. Some people were crying as they spoke. Every word peeled back another layer of Trenton's corruption. Trenton couldn't stay quiet. He shouted that every territory on the continent collected taxes. Without taxes, how could they feed the army that protected these ungrateful commoners? How could they supply the Allied defense line? He warned me not to be fooled by their complaints. That was the last straw. I ordered Isekai'd to seize him. The moment Isekai'd drew his blade and grabbed Trenton, the city's soldiers reached for their weapons. I looked at them calmly and asked if they were planning to attack their legitimate lord. Was this a rebellion? I reminded them that the last person who rebelled against me had his entire family executed, down to the family dog. If they wanted the same fate, they were welcome to try. The soldiers exchanged nervous glances. I told them to put their weapons away and stand down. If they did, I'd pretend nothing happened. One knight lowered his sword and stepped back. Then a second, then a third. Within moments, they'd all surrendered without a fight. News of what I'd done in the capital had already reached them. Nobody wanted to test me. I turned back to Trenton and addressed him loudly enough for everyone to hear. I didn't care who he'd been working for or what his reasons were. Twin Tower City was my territory now, and these were my people. What he'd done to them was unforgivable. I sentenced him to death on the spot. The square went completely silent. Even the citizens who'd been excitedly calling out his crimes went quiet, their hearts pounding. Trenton's face drained of color. He stammered that I couldn't kill him. He was a knight, a noble. Church law said nobles were exempt from execution. That was the rule that had let people like him do whatever they wanted to commoners for generations. I reminded him that I'd already wiped out the church. Their rules meant nothing anymore. Before he could say another word, I waved my hand. Isekai'd's blade came down, and Trenton's head rolled across the stone. The soldiers who'd served under him stood frozen, their hands trembling. I ignored them and turned to the frightened citizens. I told them not to be afraid. Corrupt officials like Trenton deserved to die. I was their lord now, and I would protect them. Then I made an announcement that changed everything. From today onward, all existing taxes were abolished. Farmers would pay only 30% of their harvest. Merchants would pay 30% of their earnings. And beyond that, there would be no other taxes of any kind. Nothing hidden, nothing extra. Just 30%, period. The crowd couldn't believe it. Under Trenton, the combined taxes had exceeded 90%. People could barely survive. Now I was telling them they'd keep 70% of everything they earned. An old man asked if this was real, his voice shaking. I told him it was. The entire square dropped to their knees. Men, women, elderly, children, all of them bowing and thanking me. For these people, this wasn't just a policy change. It was the difference between starving and living. I told them to get up and go collect their grain. After the civilians cleared out, I walked over to the soldiers. They all knelt immediately. I told them I wouldn't punish anyone for what they'd done under Trenton. That was the past. But starting today, there were 3 new rules, and breaking any of them meant death. First, my orders must be obeyed without question. Second, no retreating in battle without my command. Third, no bullying, harassing, or stealing from civilians. Not even a needle. I asked if they could follow these rules. The first response was weak and scattered. I told them I couldn't hear them. The second response came back loud and clear, echoing off the castle walls. Good enough for now. Discipline would come with time. I appointed Isekai'd as the new knight commander and had him take the soldiers away for reorganization. Then I called Xiaohe inside the castle to talk strategy. With the internal threats eliminated, it was time to build. My system needed prosperity points to unlock new features, and I was eager to see what came next. Just the knight summoning and talent recruitment alone had already proven incredibly powerful. Xiaohe was everything I'd hoped for. In the short time since his arrival, he'd already studied Twin Towers City thoroughly. The agriculture, industry, commerce, fishing, everything. We talked late into the night, mapping out a development plan for the entire territory. I handed over the iron mine and workshop from my starter pack to his management. Then he raised a serious concern. The Allied defense line was 50 kilometers to the west. Lane Kingdom was required to send them 50,000 pounds of grain and 10,000 gold coins every month as their contribution. Twin Tower City's share of that burden was 10,000 pounds of grain and 2,000 gold coins. The Allied envoy would arrive in 2 days to collect. From Trenton's estate, we'd confiscated 30,000 pounds of grain and 20,000 gold coins. It sounded like a lot, but if we had to hand over large portions to the Alliance every month while also developing the city, we'd go broke fast. That was probably why Trenton had taxed the people so brutally. The Alliance contribution ate up everything. I told Xiaohe not to worry about it. I had grain and gold stored away. Whether I'd actually give any to the Alliance was another question entirely. I wasn't about to hand over my hard-earned resources that easily. I'd see what these Alliance people were like first. Xiaohe rubbed his hands together eagerly and asked about the funds for development. I told him to meet me at the warehouse tomorrow. I'd give him 100,000 pounds of grain and 50,000 gold coins to work with. His eyes lit up. With resources like that, Twin Tower City's transformation could begin immediately. And with it, my prosperity rating would start climbing, unlocking whatever the system had waiting for me next. The Allied defense line was supposed to protect us from beastmen, but Twin Tower City still got raided several times a year. That didn't add up. We were paying them enormous amounts of grain and gold every month, yet beastmen kept slipping through. Either the defense line had holes, or they simply weren't doing their job. Either way, I wasn't going to sit behind my walls waiting for trouble. I wanted to see what was beyond that line for myself. If beastmen could cross into my territory, then I could cross into theirs. Before I could plan anything, a follower burst in with urgent news. Beastmen had been spotted approaching Twin Tower City. Perfect timing. I'd been curious about what they looked like and how they fought. I told Tai to prepare a force and make sure to capture at least one alive. From the city walls, I watched them approach. 10 of them, each about 2 meters tall with green skin, sharp fangs, and carrying stone hammers and crude weapons. They didn't charge the walls, though. Instead, they circled around, studying the defenses like they were mapping the place out. That was interesting. This wasn't a raid. It looked more like reconnaissance. One of the old Twin Towers knights spoke up nervously. He said these beastmen were incredibly strong, but they'd probably just grab some food and leave. He suggested we let them go. I asked him if that was what they'd always done, just watch and do nothing while their people got robbed. I asked where their pride as knights had gone. They all lowered their heads in shame. I told Tai to show these soldiers how real warriors handled beastmen. He rode out with 10 heavy cavalry knights. The beastmen spotted them and got excited rather than afraid. Apparently, in their experience, human soldiers were weak. Even armored ones could be smashed apart with stone hammers. They howled with anticipation. They had no idea what they were facing. Tai charged with his iron spear and ran the first beastman clean through the chest. The other knights tore through the rest just as easily. Within moments, 9 beastmen lay dead on the ground. The 10th was deliberately left alive, my prisoner. They dragged him before me. I turned to the Twin Towers soldiers and asked if these were the terrifyingly powerful beastmen they'd been so afraid of. They had nothing to say. Their whole world had just been turned upside down. For years, Trenton had used the beastman threat to terrorize the population and squeeze them for money. Now they'd just watch my knights destroy a beastman squad like it was nothing. I warned them that if anyone showed cowardice in future battles, I wouldn't be kind about it. They responded with conviction this time. Many of them were commoners whose families had just received my tax cuts and free grain. They were starting to genuinely respect me, not out of fear, but because I was the first lord who actually fought for them. For the first time, they realized beastmen could be killed and captured by human warriors. The captured beastman refused to talk. He turned his head away and demanded a duel, saying beastmen would never be slaves. Tai told him he wasn't worthy of a duel. When two knights approached to tie him up, the Beastman tried a surprise attack. But my system-summoned knights were just as big and strong as Beastmen. One of them caught his wrist mid-swing and stopped the stone hammer cold. The Beastman couldn't believe it. They bound him and hauled him away. I told Tai to get information out of him by any means necessary. I wanted to know why these Beastmen came, what the Allied defense line situation really was, and everything about the Beastman side of the border. Elena asked if the Beastmen had just come to steal. I shook my head. If they'd wanted to plunder, they wouldn't have sent only 10 and spent their time circling the walls studying our defenses. This was a scouting party. That meant something bigger was coming. I told Elena not to worry. If the Allied defense line failed us, we'd simply stop relying on it. Throughout history, depending on others always ended badly. The only thing you could truly count on was your own strength. She looked confused by that philosophy, but I didn't elaborate further. The castle in Twin Towers City was magnificent, even more impressive than the royal estate in the capital. Not flashy, but commanding. I slept well that night. The next morning, my first action was summoning. 3 heavy knights appeared, another lucky burst. My mounted force was growing rapidly. Then I checked the talent recruitment timer. 6 more days until I could summon another specialist. Patience. Tai came to me with the interrogation results. I took the written confession to my study and read it carefully. The information was explosive. First, the Beastman tribes had been watching the human nations for years and were tired of waiting. They weren't just probing Twin Towers City. They were scouting defensive positions across multiple kingdoms simultaneously. They were preparing for a full-scale war against humanity. Second, the Allied defense line had grown complacent after years of relative peace. The Beastmen planned to exploit that weakness with a sudden coordinated attack, catching the human forces completely off guard. Third, the Beastman tribes weren't unified. Different tribes fought each other over resources and territory. The captured Beastman belonged to a small tribe, which meant not every tribe was equally powerful or equally committed to the coming war. Fourth, and this was the critical piece, within the next 2 days, 500 Beastman warriors would break through the defense line and launch a direct assault on Twin Towers City. Their plan was to capture the city first, then swing back and hit the Allied defense line from behind, creating a devastating two-front attack that would collapse the entire western border. Tai said I had nothing to worry about. 500 Beastmen were nothing. His knights could handle them easily. I agreed, but I wasn't just thinking about defense. I remembered what Xiao He had told me. The Allied envoy was coming in 2 days to collect our monthly tribute of grain and gold. The timing was perfect. If 500 Beastmen attacked right when the Allied envoy arrived, that envoy would witness firsthand that their precious defense line had completely failed. They'd see my forces, not theirs, defending the border. That would give me leverage to renegotiate or outright refuse the monthly payments. Why should I fund an army that couldn't even stop 500 raiders? This wasn't just a battle. It was an opportunity to free Twin Towers City from the Alliance's financial drain permanently. I called Tai close and started laying out a plan. This had to be executed precisely. The Beastmen needed to arrive at exactly the right moment. The Allied envoy needed to see exactly the right things, and my forces needed to deliver a victory so decisive that nobody could question Twin Towers City's ability to defend itself. I began explaining the details to Tai step by step. On the 3rd day, the Allied envoy arrived at Twin Towers City just as expected. Tai was on gate duty, and I'd given him specific instructions. When the envoy's group approached, Tai demanded they identify themselves before entering. The lead knight was furious. He shouted that anyone should recognize him and demanded Trenton come out immediately. Tai told him flatly that Trenton was dead and couldn't come. If they wouldn't identify themselves properly, they could turn around and leave. Otherwise, they'd be killed on the spot. The knight's soldiers laughed at Tai's attitude. They mocked him, saying their commander Charles would make him pay for such disrespect once they got inside. One of the attendants even threatened that if Charles was angered, the Allied army would withdraw from their section of the defense line, leaving Twin Towers City and all of Lane Kingdom exposed to the Beastmen. Tai didn't flinch. He repeated his demand for credentials. Charles was livid but had no choice. He needed to get inside to complete his mission. He announced himself as Knight Charles, envoy of the 9th Defense Line. here to collect military provisions per the alliance agreement. He ordered the gates opened. Tai examined the documents, confirmed they were legitimate, and let them through. Charles entered with a cold expression. He didn't recognize Tai at all and asked where Trenton was. Tai told him again that Trenton was dead. Charles was confused but ultimately didn't care much. Dead or alive, he just wanted his grain and gold. They brought him to me at the castle. Tai introduced me as Count Zhuanghua, the new lord of Twin Tower City. Charles was surprised by the change in leadership. He glanced at Alice standing behind me and seemed to notice her armor resembled temple knight gear, which made him cautious. He greeted me politely enough. I smiled warmly and told him the provisions were already prepared. He could take them whenever he wanted. Charles relaxed immediately. As long as the grain was secured, everything else was minor. He assured me that the Allied forces would keep the beastmen behind the defense line and that we should just focus on farming and production. I told him I believed him completely. He seemed pleased by my cooperative attitude. Then he brought up Tai Yi's behavior at the gate, saying my knight commander had been rude and nearly caused a misunderstanding. He suggested that if they'd actually left because of the insult, Twin Tower City would have been defenseless against any beastman attack. I played along perfectly. I immediately ordered my men to arrest Tai Yi and throw him in the dungeon for being disrespectful. I told Charles that Twin Tower City stood firmly with the Alliance. Charles was delighted. He'd expected some pushback from the new lord, but I was turning out to be just as easy to handle as Trenton had been. In his mind, everyone on this side of the defense line had to bow to the Alliance. I was no different. Right on schedule, Volume 50 came rushing into the room in a panic. He reported that hundreds of green-skinned beastmen had appeared outside the city walls, at least 500 of them, spreading across the horizon. He asked what we should do. I jumped to my feet and grabbed Charles by the hand. I put on my most desperate expression and begged him to save us. I told him the beastmen were here and only he could protect Twin Tower City. I promised to double the provisions, 2 full shipments instead of 1, if he would just fight them off. I was practically shaking with gratitude and fear, clinging to him like he was our last hope. Charles told me to calm down, but I could see the panic spreading across his own face. He tried to hide it, but his eyes gave him away. His defense line hadn't seen real combat in years. The occasional lone beastman wandering too close was one thing, but 500 warriors? That was a wartime-level assault. He had no idea why this was happening now. He tried to think fast. He told me to send my soldiers to the walls to prepare defenses while he figured out a plan. Volume 50 helpfully informed him that all the city's defenders had already fled from the walls in terror when they saw the beastman horde. Nobody was left up there. Charles went silent. The color drained from his face. I stared at him with wide, hopeful eyes, waiting for his heroic response. But he couldn't do it. If he actually tried to fight, he and his handful of soldiers would be crushed under beastman warhammers within minutes. He knew it. His men knew it. The Alliance's mighty reputation meant nothing when real danger appeared. He thought for a moment, then told me not to worry. He said he'd personally lead his men out to intercept the beastmen, while simultaneously sending messengers to the defense line for reinforcements. I gushed with gratitude, saying I'd always known the Alliance would never abandon us. Twin Tower City was counting on him. Charles hurried outside where his own soldiers were already in a state of panic. They'd seen the Beastmen army, a dense green mass of warriors stretching across the plain. One of them asked if they were really going to fight for Twin Tower City. The fear on their faces was obvious. These men hadn't signed up for actual combat. They were glorified tax collectors. Charles dropped the act the instant he was away from me. He told his men they weren't fighting anyone. They'd slip out through a side gate, stay as far from the beastmen as possible, and run for the defense line at full speed. When someone asked about Twin Tower City, Charles sneered. He said the city was probably lost, and there was nothing they could do. Their survival was more important. They needed to bring intelligence back to the Alliance. Staying meant dying. His men agreed enthusiastically. They rushed for the side gate, and the moment Charles stepped outside and caught sight of the Beastman army in the distance, he broke into a dead sprint. I appeared on the city wall above him. I watched his retreating figure getting smaller and smaller as he ran for his life, abandoning us without a second thought. I cupped my hands around my mouth and shouted after him at the top of my lungs. I asked if he was really leaving us behind. Was the Alliance truly abandoning Twin Towers City? My voice echoed across the open ground. Charles didn't look back. He just kept running. Every soldier with him kept running. The brave protectors of the Allied defense line, the mighty force that collected tribute from every kingdom along the border. They ran from the very threat they were paid to stop. I smiled. Every single person on those walls had just witnessed the truth. The Alliance took our grain, took our gold, and the moment real danger arrived, they fled like rats. This was exactly what I needed everyone to see. From this moment on, nobody in Twin Towers City would question why I refused to keep paying tribute to cowards who wouldn't fight. Now it was time for the real show. 500 beastmen were marching toward my city, and I had absolutely no intention of running. Charles ran even faster when he heard me shouting after him. I watched his pathetic figure shrink into the distance until he confirmed he was gone. Good. Every person on those walls had witnessed the Alliance's true nature. They took our food, took our money, and ran at the first sign of real danger. Now it was time to handle the actual threat. I asked about our preparations. The defensive equipment was ready, and the civilians outside the walls had been moved to safety. I told him this battle needed to be decisive. Every single beastman had to be stopped here. No survivors escaping to report back. Swore he'd deliver their heads or forfeit his own. I climbed to the top of the castle and watched the beastman army approach. They were big and muscular, but I noticed something critical. They wore almost no armor. Just crude leather straps and animal skins. Against my fully armored knights, that difference would be devastating. And I had no intention of meeting them in open combat anyway. I had thick stone walls, prepared defenses, and a garrison ready to fight. Why throw away that advantage? The beastmen charged toward the walls like they expected an easy victory. They probably had good reason. Based on their past experiences raiding human settlements, most defenders either fled or put up a token resistance before collapsing. They'd never encountered a city that was actually prepared and willing to fight. He didn't waste time with speeches. The moment the beastmen came within range, he gave the order. Arrows rained down from the battlements. Stones crashed into the charging horde. Even boiling waste was poured over the walls onto anyone who got close. The beastmen started falling before they even reached the base of the walls. By the time the survivors pressed against the stone, the casualties were already staggering. Attacking a fortified city has always been the bloodiest form of warfare. These beastmen had raw strength, but no siege equipment, no strategy, and no experience fighting against prepared defenses. They were throwing bodies at a stone wall and expecting it to crack. Their leader saw over half his force cut down and finally called a retreat. But I'd planned for this too. The moment they turned to run, the city gates swung open. He led the charge personally, not with regular soldiers, but with all 20 knights. 15 of my system summoned heavy cavalry, plus the 5 original Twin Towers knights, all mounted on warhorses, fully armored, wielding heavy weapons. They hit the retreating beastmen like a hammer hitting glass. Elena was standing beside me on the wall, watching in amazement as 20 riders tore through what remained of the beastman force. She'd never imagined humans could do this to beastmen. I explained the mathematics of it. My knights were physically just as large and strong as beastmen, but they had full body armor, trained warhorses, and superior weapons. Armored against unarmored was pure domination. A few cavalry charges was all it took. The beastman army was shattered. Personally captured their leader alive and brought him before me in chains. I offered the leader a chance to live if he cooperated. He spat at me and shouted that beastmen would never be slaves. I shrugged and had him thrown in a cell. I told the guards I'd interrogate him tomorrow. All I wanted was intelligence about the beastman positions near the 9th defense line. Down in the dungeon, the leader, whose name turned out to be Nus, discovered the beastman scout we'd captured days earlier was already locked up in the next cell. Nus was shocked to find his own tribesmen still alive and immediately accused him of betraying their people. The scout tried to explain. He said these humans weren't like the ones on the battlefield. They were terrifyingly strong, and escaping was impossible. He quietly suggested that Nus cooperate, saying it might be their only chance to survive. Nus exploded with rage, pounding the cell door and screaming about beastman pride. The scout just sighed and said if Nus wouldn't cooperate, he'd probably never leave that cell alive. I let them sort that out among themselves. I had something much more exciting to focus on. My system panel had lit up with a notification I'd been hoping for. The system congratulated me on winning my first war against a foreign race. It started generating a reward, something called an elite infantry regiment. My heart raced, but then came the familiar crackling sound. System error. Correction in progress. I braced myself for disappointment. The system always glitched at the worst possible moment. After a tense few seconds, the correction finished. The infantry regiment was gone, replaced by two different rewards, a military talisman and an intermediate witch magic compendium. The military talisman was incredible. Once activated, it would summon 500 elite heavy infantry soldiers to fight for me for an entire day. They looked similar to my heavy knights, but fought on foot, armed with horse-cutting sabers and iron shields. After use, it needed 7 days to recharge. 500 disciplined heavy infantry appearing out of thin air could swing any battle. Combined with my growing cavalry force, this gave me the ability to field a serious army on demand. The second reward was equally valuable in a different way. The intermediate witch magic compendium was essentially an instant upgrade. It could transform any witch into a mid-level practitioner with access to intermediate-level spells. I called Eilina over and casually asked about the witch ranking system. She explained that witches progressed through several stages: newly awakened, beginner, intermediate, advanced, and legendary. She was still at the beginner level, capable of healing and basic binding spells. An intermediate witch was significantly more powerful, gaining access to elemental magic and other supernatural abilities. However, she warned that witches without proper training were dangerous, an uncontrolled witch could cause as much destruction as a demon woman. I looked at Eilina and smiled. I asked her if she wanted to become an intermediate witch. Her eyes went wide. She had no idea what I was about to give her, but the possibility alone was enough to leave her speechless. This girl had saved my knights countless times with her healing, protected my horses from sabotage, guarded Midia from MOU's manipulation, and fought beside me in every battle since the first day we met. If anyone deserved this upgrade, it was her. And with intermediate-level magic, she wouldn't just be my healer anymore. She'd become a true combat asset, someone who could stand alongside my knights and hold her own against demon women, beast men, or whatever else this world threw at us. The system had glitched again, costing me an entire infantry regiment. But what it gave me instead might prove even more valuable in the long run. A one-use army was powerful, but a permanently upgraded Eilina would pay dividends every single day from here on out. Twin Tower City was mine. The beastmen had been crushed. The Alliance had been exposed as frauds. And my forces were growing stronger with every passing day. The real conquest was just beginning. Eilina tried to be humble about the upgrade. She said she didn't need anything special. Just staying by my side as a follower was enough. I told her to stop being ridiculous and immediately used the intermediate witch magic compendium on her. The moment I touched her with it, her aura exploded with power. Knowledge of dozens of new spells flooded into her mind, and she could feel that casting them would be effortless. She stared at me in disbelief. Even for a naturally born witch, reaching intermediate level normally required years of slow study and practice. I'd done it with a single touch. I told her not to be surprised. If she kept growing, maybe one day she'd become the most powerful witch in the world. I also promised that someday I'd make the world understand that witches weren't monsters. They were angels who saved people. Her eyes got watery. I told her I didn't like crying girls, especially not the person I trusted most. She lit up at those words. First I'd called her the most important person, now the most trusted. She was practically glowing as she left to heal any soldiers wounded in the battle. With the Beastman threat handled for now, I turned my attention westward. 500 Beastmen breaking through the defense line meant that line had serious problems. I needed to see the situation for myself and assess whether the Beastman territories beyond were worth conquering. I found Xiao He and gave him orders. I'd be taking the military west to scout and possibly expand. He'd be in charge of Twin Towers City's defense and development while I was gone. He accepted without a single question. No hesitation, no requests for clarification. Just a confident acknowledgement. That was what real talent looked like. Someone who understood the mission and executed without needing their hand held. But before heading into Beastman territory, I needed intelligence. The captured Beastman leader would be useful if I could make him talk. and I wanted to understand what the Allied defense line actually looked like up close. Meanwhile, Charles and his men had run all the way back to their section of the defense line without stopping. When they finally felt safe, they were panting and rattled. His soldiers wondered why 500 beastmen had suddenly appeared after years of quiet. Charles guessed it might be a small tribe acting independently. Either way, collecting grain wasn't happening today. Back at his fortress, Charles reported to his superior, the Knight Commander of the 9th Defense Line. He told him about the beastmen at Twin Tower City and said the city was probably lost. The Knight Commander wasn't concerned. He said their job was defending the wall, not rescuing cities behind it. As long as beastmen didn't attack the defense line itself, everything beyond the wall wasn't their problem. Without Lane Kingdom's grain payment, he considered their obligation to that kingdom completely void. But the Knight Commander also told Charles that the missing grain shipment needed to be made up somehow. Charles was stunned. How was he supposed to produce thousands of pounds of grain out of thin air? The Knight Commander didn't care. He just dismissed Charles. Then a scout came running in with unexpected news. Twin Tower City had survived. The beastmen had been defeated, and their forces had vanished without a trace. Charles was shocked. He considered going back to collect the grain, but his pride stopped him. He'd fled that morning in front of everyone. Returning the same day would be humiliating beyond measure. And what if the beastmen were still lurking nearby? He decided to stay put and figure out the grain problem some other way. The next day, I put my plan into action. I rode to the 9th defense line with Tyre and brought 5,000 pounds of grain as bait. When we arrived, I found Charles outside the fortress. I put on my most worried expression and told him the beastman attack had devastated Twin Tower City. I said the beastmen were still somewhere in our territory, and I was terrified. I'd brought grain as a down payment, begging the Alliance to send soldiers to help hunt them down. Charles was caught off guard. He'd expected me to be angry about his cowardly retreat. Instead, here I was practically on my knees asking for his help. That confused him enough to lower his guard. He admitted he was just an envoy without authority to deploy troops, but offered to ask his Knight Commander. The moment he left to make his request, I had Tyre begin scouting the entire fortress. A system-trained elite knight could map out troop positions, fortification weaknesses, supply locations, and garrison strength faster than any spy. By the time Charles came back, I'd know everything about this place. The Knight Commander heard Charles out and immediately dismissed the idea of helping. He said that on the open field, away from their walls, his soldiers would be slaughtered by beastmen. They only survived because they could hide behind stone fortifications. Going to Twin Tower City to fight would be suicide. Charles asked what they should do since the 9th Defense Line was specifically responsible for protecting Lane Kingdom's sector. Their benefactor was literally at their doorstep begging for help. The Knight Commander's response was chilling. He said to accept the grain, pretend to agree to help, and simply wait. Once the beastmen destroyed Twin Tower City and killed everyone there, nobody would be left to complain. Problem solved. No more awkward requests for protection and free grain on top of it. Charles was taken aback by how ruthless that was, but he saw the logic. It got rid of a troublesome situation, avoided any actual fighting, and came with 5,000 pounds of free food. He went back to deliver the good news to me. I was still wearing my frightened, grateful expression when Charles returned and told me the Knight Commander had agreed to help. I thanked him profusely, acting like he'd just saved my life. Inside, I was barely holding back a smile. These Alliance soldiers were exactly what I'd suspected, cowards hiding behind walls, collecting tribute from nations they had no intention of actually protecting. Their Knight Commander had just agreed to let an entire city die to avoid paperwork. Tyre had already finished his reconnaissance. I now knew exactly how many soldiers they had, where they were positioned, and how weak their actual combat capability was. This fortress was a paper tiger, impressive walls protecting soldiers who couldn't fight their way out of a barn. Just as Charles finished telling me the Alliance would support us, screams erupted from the walls of the defense line fortress. Alarm horns blared. Soldiers scrambled in every direction, their faces white with terror. Someone was shouting at the top of their lungs from the watchtower. Beastmen were attacking the defense line. I looked at the chaos erupting around me and felt nothing but calm satisfaction. Everything was falling into place. The Alliance was about to discover that the cozy arrangement they'd enjoyed for years, taking grain, avoiding combat, letting border cities fend for themselves, was officially over. Whether they realized it yet or not, the balance of power on this frontier had already shifted. And it had shifted to me. Charles took one look at the beastmen attacking the defense line and bolted without a word to me. He vanished into the fortress. Moments later, soldiers appeared on the walls, but almost no knights among them. Charles and his mysterious knight commander were nowhere to be seen. Tyre asked what we should do. I told him to wait. The 9th defense line couldn't fall to the beastmen. If it did, I'd lose a crucial staging ground for any future campaign into beastman territory. That fortress would become the biggest obstacle to my expansion plans. But I wanted to see how the defenders handled things before committing my forces. Tyre pointed out we only had 20 men. I told him I had it covered. First priority was finding Charles and the knight commander. We searched the fortress, but found it completely empty. Then Tyre spotted them. A group of about 50 riders galloping away from the back exit, heading north at full speed. The knight commander, Charles, and every single knight had abandoned the fortress and their own soldiers without a second thought. Tyre was furious. As a soldier himself, the idea of officers abandoning their men in the middle of a battle was unforgivable. I didn't waste energy being angry. I focused on the walls instead. The situation was deteriorating fast. Without knights leading the defense, the regular soldiers were crumbling. Beastmen were already climbing onto the walls. These defenders had courage, but they lacked the heavy firepower needed to push back creatures twice their size wielding stone hammers. I made my decision without hesitation. I activated the military talisman. 500 elite heavy infantry materialized on the open ground behind the walls, fully armed with horse-cutting sabers and iron shields, radiating killing intent. They didn't speak a word. They didn't need to. I ordered Tyre to lead them up the walls immediately. No beastman was to survive. Tyre's worried expression transformed into a grin the moment he saw those 500 warriors. He charged up the walls with them right behind him. The effect was immediate. The collapsing defenders saw 500 armored soldiers storming up the battlements and found their courage again. They rallied behind Tyre and pushed back hard. The beastmen were completely blindsided. Their scouts had told them this fortress was weak and undermanned. They'd expected an easy breakthrough. Instead, they ran headfirst into a wall of iron and steel that cut them down without mercy. The battle lasted about 2 hours. The beastmen fought hard, but they were outmatched. My heavy infantry held the walls like an immovable dam, while the original garrison soldiers fought alongside them with renewed determination. Eventually, the beastmen broke and retreated. Over 500 of them lay dead on and around the walls. The system rewarded me for the victory. It started generating something called a legendary general recruitment card. My heart jumped at those words. A legendary general would be far superior to any of my current knights. But then came the dreaded crackling noise. System error. Correction. The legendary general card disappeared, replaced by something called riding mastery. I sighed. The system always snatched the best rewards away. But riding mastery wasn't nothing. I could feel the change in my body immediately. If someone put me on a horse right now, I could fight and maneuver like I'd been training my whole life. I still didn't have the physical strength for real combat, but combined with future system rewards, maybe someday I'd ride into battle myself. Tyre reported 532 beastmen killed. I walked out to address the surviving garrison. These men had just been abandoned by every officer they served under. Their knights had fled and left them to die. I told them exactly that. They'd been thrown away like garbage by the people who were supposed to lead them. Then I offered them a choice. I was Zhuang Hua, Lord of Twin Towers City. From today, I was taking control of the 9th defense line. Anyone who wanted to stay and serve under me would be treated well. Anyone who wanted to leave could take 10 pounds of grain as travel money and go wherever they pleased. No hard feelings. These soldiers weren't cowards. They'd stood on those walls and fought beastmen hand to hand while their commanders ran. That kind of courage was worth more to me than any fancy title or expensive armor. I respected them, and I wanted them to know it. One by one they dropped to their knees. 530 soldiers, every single one, pledged loyalty to me. They had nowhere else to go anyway. If the Allied command found out about the fortress falling, they'd be executed as deserters regardless of the truth. But beyond survival, they'd seen my reinforcements fight. Those 500 heavy infantry had been something out of a legend. If following me meant eventually becoming warriors like that, these men were more than willing. I had Tyre organize the new recruits while I inspected the fortress. My system panel updated. The 9th defense line was now listed as my second territory alongside Twin Towers City. My prosperity rating had climbed to 130. Still no indication of what threshold would unlock new features, but progress was progress. Something still bothered me, though. How had those original 500 beastmen from the previous day's attack on Twin Towers City gotten past this defense line in the first place? The wall looked intact. The garrison, while badly led, had been present. Beastmen didn't have wings. There had to be a gap somewhere, or someone had let them through deliberately. I sent Tyre to question the new soldiers about any breaches or suspicious activity they'd witnessed. This was a security problem that directly threatened my territory. It needed answers. I looked northward toward the 8th defense line, where Charles and his knight commander had fled. I wondered if they'd come back. Probably not anytime soon. As it turned out, the runaway knight commander, his real name was Leon, was already coaching his people on how to cover up their cowardice. He planned to tell their superior, Commander Bruce, that the beastmen had attacked in overwhelming numbers and they'd been forced to retreat after fierce resistance. But there was a problem. None of them had a scratch on them. Their armor was spotless, their weapons clean. They looked like they'd been on a picnic, not in a battle. Leon's solution was disturbingly practical. He drew his sword and told everyone they needed to wound each other, slash arms, cut legs, create visible injuries. Then they'd discard some equipment along the way to make it look like a fighting retreat. Charles asked nervously if it would hurt. Leon looked at him and asked whether he was more afraid of pain or death. These were the men the Allied nations trusted to protect their borders. Officers who fled from combat, abandoned their soldiers, and then cut each other with swords to fake battle injuries. The entire defense system was rotten from the inside out. I felt no guilt about taking the 9th defense line for myself. These cowards didn't deserve it. My soldiers, the ones who actually fought, did. And from now on, this stretch of the frontier belonged to me. Any beastman who came this way would face real warriors, not uniformed actors playing soldier while collecting tribute from kingdoms they'd never defend. Tyre came back with his report on how the beastmen had gotten past the defense line. The wall itself was long and solid, nearly impossible to breach without being noticed. But there was one spot. On the eastern end of the 9th defense line, a steep cliff had a narrow gap in it, just wide enough for one person to squeeze through at a time. The critical detail was that Knight Commander Leon had specifically ordered his soldiers to stay away from that area. It was a direct command, not a suggestion. A defensive position with an obvious weak point, and the commander forbids anyone from going near it. That told me everything I needed to know. Leon had either been letting beastmen through on purpose or had some kind of arrangement with whoever was on the other side. The exact reason didn't matter much right now. I told Tyre to take some men, inspect the gap, and seal it shut. Problem solved. I was more focused on the bigger picture. With the 9th defense line under my control, I had a perfect strategic position. I could push forward into beastman territory whenever I chose, and my rear, Twin Tower City, would remain safe behind the wall. As long as the human alliance didn't interfere, I could slowly consume beastman lands and grow my domain while my system developed alongside it. Eventually, I'd be strong enough to expand along the entire defense line and absorb other territories and kingdoms. While walking through the fortress, I noticed something odd about the floor in one section. I asked what was underneath. The soldiers told me it was a restricted underground area, Leon's personal space that only his closest knights were allowed to enter. I ordered it opened immediately. Every time I'd found a locked basement or cellar since arriving in this world, it had contained either treasure or horrors. Sometimes both. This one turned out to be surprisingly clean and organized. Bags of grain and stacks of gold coins filled one side. Years of surplus from collecting tribute while never actually fighting. That made sense. No wars, minimal expenses, but full collections from Lane Kingdom every month. Of course they'd been hoarding wealth. But what caught my eye was a display rack on the opposite wall. Strange objects sat on shelves. Things that looked like drums, bowls, and other unusual instruments. Some shelves held dried specimens of creatures I didn't recognize. Alina stepped up beside me and identified them immediately. The objects were magical implements used by demon women, not staffs, but alternative tools that enhanced different types of magic. Each one had a unique function. The specimens were preserved remains of magical creatures. I was surprised she knew so much about demon woman equipment, considering she'd grown up as a simple village girl. She explained that when I'd upgraded her to intermediate level, the knowledge that flooded into her mind included extensive understanding of demon women and their tools. I asked if she could use any of these implements herself. She shook her head. Witch power and demon woman power came from fundamentally different sources. These items were useless to her. I swept everything into my storage space anyway. They might prove valuable later, maybe for trade, study, or if I ever recruited a demon woman to my side. The real mystery was why a human alliance fortress had a collection of demon woman artifacts hidden in its basement. I hadn't encountered any demon women here. Leon's secrets went deeper than simple corruption, but I didn't have time to unravel them all tonight. I was exhausted and starving. Elena hurried off to prepare dinner. These days, when she wasn't healing wounded soldiers or treating sick civilians, she spent her time taking care of me personally, cooking 3 meals a day, keeping my quarters clean, attending to every small need. She looked less like a powerful witch and more like a devoted caretaker. I appreciated it more than I showed. That night, as I lay in bed, a red glow lit up the sky outside my window, coming from the direction of the Beastman territories beyond the wall. I sat up and asked if we were under attack. Alice, standing guard at the door as always, said no beastmen had approached, but she'd detected magical energy fluctuations coming from that direction. Magical energy in beastman territory. That meant demon women were active out there. The fire and the magic were connected somehow. Maybe a ritual, maybe a battle between beastman factions. Whatever it wasn't an immediate threat. I told Alice to wake me if enemies appeared and went back to sleep. The next morning brought an incredible surprise from the system. I summoned my daily knights and received 5 heavy cavalry riders at once. 5 in a single pull, the highest number I'd ever gotten. The system's output ceiling was apparently still rising. My mounted force was becoming a genuine army. The talisman soldiers from yesterday had vanished as expected, needing 7 days to recharge, but my permanent knight roster kept growing. Nothing had happened during the night, so I headed out for my morning inspection. The defense line was already running smoother than it ever had under Leon. Tyer's knights were leading the patrols, and the newly recruited garrison soldiers were performing their duties with actual discipline and purpose. It was amazing what competent leadership could accomplish. I asked Tyer about the cliff gap. He said they hadn't found any beastmen there, but something unexpected had turned up instead. A woman had come through from the other side. A human woman. She was severely injured, barely alive when they found her, unable to speak, covered in whip marks that crisscrossed her entire body. She looked about 20 years old, dressed in torn rags. I went to see her immediately and brought Elena along. The sight was painful even for me. Deep lash wounds covered her skin, some old and scarred over, some fresh and still bleeding. Whatever she'd been through, it had been prolonged and brutal. Elena's eyes filled with pity. She asked if she should heal her. Before I could answer, Alice spoke up quietly from behind me. She said the woman had magical energy inside her body. Very faint, but unmistakably present. That meant she was a demon woman. Elena hesitated, looking at me uncertainly. A demon woman from Beastman territory, crawling through a hidden gap in the defense line, beaten nearly to death. The cautious move would be to leave her or interrogate her first. I told Elena to heal her. Just because someone was a demon woman didn't make them evil. We couldn't let a person die in front of us based on what they might be. Elena nodded and began casting her upgraded healing magic. The improvement from her intermediate level was obvious. She barely needed to chant, and the healing worked faster than ever. The woman's wounds started closing within moments. Her deathly pale face slowly gained color. When she finally opened her eyes and saw us standing around her, fear and suspicion immediately filled her gaze. She looked at each of us, armored knights, a witch glowing with healing light, and me staring down at her with curiosity. She asked who we were. Her voice was hoarse and weak, but the wariness in it was sharp. This woman had clearly learned not to trust anyone. Whatever had happened to her on the other side of that wall had taught her that kindness from strangers usually came with a price. I looked at her bruised face and tattered clothes. Whoever this demon woman was, she'd escaped from something terrible, and she'd chosen to flee toward the human side of the wall rather than stay with the beastmen. That choice alone told me her story was worth hearing. I introduced myself to the wounded woman as Count Zhuanghua, Lord of Twin Towers City. I told her she was on my territory and asked who she was and why she'd come from Beastman lands. She hesitated, so I decided to push a little. I told her I knew she was a demon woman. There was no point hiding it. She flinched when I said those words, but I kept going. I laid out my reasoning. A demon woman wouldn't end up in Beastman territory by accident. She clearly wasn't a slave. She had magical power, even if it was faint. She must have been part of some kind of organized group operating inside Beastman lands. I asked her what they'd been doing out there. Her eyes widened as I pieced it together. Then her expression hardened. She told me to kill her or torture her, but to stop wasting time. She spat that she knew all about the Human Alliance's dirty dealings with the Beastmen and called us human scum. Alice immediately drew her sword, but I held her back. I told the woman I believed corruption existed in the Alliance. I'd seen it myself. But I wasn't part of that. I pointed to Eilina and explained she was a witch, my most trusted aide. I pointed to Alice and said she was a holy light knight, my personal guard. I asked the woman if she could imagine any Alliance commander allowing a witch and a temple-style knight to serve side by side under the same banner. She shook her head slowly. She was right. It was impossible under normal circumstances. Witches were hunted by the church, and the Alliance was built by the temple. The two couldn't coexist in any ordinary human force. Yet here they both were, standing next to each other, working for me. I could see her defenses cracking, but she still wasn't ready to open up. I didn't force it. I just asked for her name. She told me it was Lilith, an entry-level demon woman. I nodded and told Eilina to bring her food and let her rest. Then I walked away. Pressing too hard would backfire. She had secrets, possibly about a resistance movement inside Beastman territory, and I wanted those secrets, but on her terms. Meanwhile, I had other angles to work. The two Beastman prisoners back in Twin Tower City might know something useful. I sent Tai Air to dispatch a messenger ordering Tai E to intensify the interrogation of the Beastman leader Nus. I wanted every detail he could extract about Beastman movements, tribal politics, and anything related to the defense line. From the city walls, I watched the landscape beyond the defense line. Dense jungle stretched into the distance, crisscrossed with rivers and waterways. The land was clearly resource-rich, yet the beastmen living there used primitive stone weapons and wore animal skins. They were sitting on a gold mine and didn't know what to do with it. I could turn that territory into a breadbasket, fertile land producing enough food to fuel my expansion across the entire continent. I made a mental note. This place would become my agricultural powerhouse. Then explosions thundered from deep in the jungle. Not gunpowder. This world hadn't invented firearms yet. These were magical detonations. Someone was fighting out there with serious power. I thought of Lilith and her mysterious organization. Demon women were clashing with beastmen in that jungle right now. The enemy of my enemy could become a very useful friend. Minutes later, Eilina came to tell me Lilith wanted to see me again. I raised an eyebrow. She'd refused to talk earlier, but something had changed. Probably those explosions. I want to meet her. The moment she saw me, Lilith dropped to her knees. All the stubborn defiance was gone, replaced by desperation. She begged me to help rescue her companions. She explained everything. Demon women like her had nowhere to go in human society. Hunted by churches and feared by commoners. Some had gathered in the no-man's land between human and beastman territories and formed something called the Demon Woman Alliance. They'd lived quietly at first, bothering no one. But then they discovered something horrifying. The Human Alliance had been capturing civilians and selling them to beastman tribes as slaves. When she said this, both Alice and Eilina clenched their fists. The Alliance wasn't just incompetent. They were actively trafficking human beings to the enemy. Lilith said the Demon Woman Alliance had spent the past 10 years secretly rescuing enslaved humans from beastman camps. They'd saved many lives, but lost many of their own members in the process. Last night, her squad had attacked a weakened beastman tribe, the same one that had sent the 500 warriors I destroyed at Twin Tower City. With half their fighters dead, Lilith's group saw an opening. But the attack failed. The tribe had a beastman shaman, a magical practitioner similar to a demon woman, who was far more powerful than they'd anticipated. Her squad walked into a trap. Lilith barely escaped, but her sisters were still trapped inside the enemy camp. She looked at me with pleading eyes and said she knew I'd beaten the Beastman army yesterday. She believed I had the strength to save her people. She begged me to try. I didn't answer immediately. Yesterday, I'd had the military talisman and 500 elite infantry at my disposal. Today, I had 20 heavy knights and 500 ordinary soldiers. Charging into a Beastman camp in dense jungle wasn't the same as defending a stone fortress. It would be reckless. I told Lilith to give me details first. She said the tribe had around 2,000 total population with about 800 warriors. After yesterday's losses, roughly 400 fighters remained, plus the dangerous shaman. It was weakened, but not helpless. I thought it over. 400 beastmen and 1 shaman against my 20 heavy cavalry. The numbers weren't great for an assault, but my knights had proven they could handle beastmen with ease in direct combat. The shaman was the real threat, an unknown variable with magical abilities. I made her an offer. I'd go rescue her companions, but in exchange, she had to pledge her service to me permanently. She looked stunned and asked why I'd want a demon woman working for me. I told her I didn't care about labels. The fact that her group risked their lives to save ordinary humans proved they weren't evil. I valued useful people, and demon women had powers that complemented what I already had. She agreed without hesitation. Her sisters' lives were more important than her freedom. I smiled and waved my hand. The demon woman artifacts I'd found in Leon's secret basement materialized in front of her. Drums, bowls, and other strange implements, all high-quality magical tools. Lilith's hands trembled as she examined them. She whispered that these were top-tier artifacts and asked where I'd gotten them. I told her it didn't matter. What mattered was whether she could use them. She nodded vigorously, practically in tears. These tools would dramatically amplify her magical abilities. I pushed the entire collection toward her. All yours, I said. Consider it in advance on your future service. If we were going to rescue her people from a beastman shaman, I wanted my new demon woman fighting at full power. Lilith stared at the artifacts in disbelief. She asked if I was really giving her all of them. I told her she was one of my people now, and these tools were useless sitting in storage. Making her stronger made me stronger. She asked what would stop her from taking the artifacts and running. I told her that if she did, it would only prove I'd misjudged her character. But I didn't think she was that kind of person. She smiled at that, the first genuine smile I'd seen from her. I told her to familiarize herself with the artifacts quickly. We'd be moving out that night. She nodded and got to work. I sent word to Twin Tower City for Isekai'd to bring the rest of my knights to the defense line. With the gap in the wall sealed, the city didn't need a heavy garrison anymore. I wanted every available fighter for tonight's operation. By evening, Isekai'd arrived with his contingent. I asked about the Beastman leader Nuz and what he'd revealed under interrogation. The intelligence confirmed everything Lilith had told me and added more detail. 7 Beastman tribes operated in the territory beyond the 9th defense line. The largest tribe's chief had a trading arrangement with the Human Alliance, selling captured humans as slaves in exchange for allowing small raiding parties through the wall. That explained Leon's secret gap in the cliff and the demon woman artifacts in his basement. He'd been involved in the trafficking. Isekai'd also confirmed that the Alliance's high command knew about the demon women fighting beastmen in the jungle. Rather than helping them or seizing the opportunity to weaken the Beastman tribes, the Alliance had deliberately stood back, hoping the two sides would destroy each other. Less work for them. The Beastman leader's tribe, the strongest of the 7, was apparently using the Alliance's passivity to prepare for a massive coordinated war against the human nations. That was a problem for later. Tonight, I had a smaller target. I told Isekai'd to get the troops ready and rested. We'd launch at dawn. No, at the deepest point of night, when the beastmen would be sleeping. I wanted maximum surprise. This was our first offensive operation into enemy territory, and I intended to participate personally. I needed to see beastman combat strength up close and understand what we'd be dealing with long term. With Alice guarding me, my personal safety wasn't a concern. At midnight, I summoned my daily knights. 5 more heavy cavalry appeared, another incredible burst. 2 nights in a row with 5 knights each. My mounted force was becoming terrifying. With these reinforcements, I had 30 heavy cavalry knights ready for tonight's assault. I assembled the strike force, 30 knights, 500 soldiers, plus Eilina for healing support, Lilith for magical offense, and Alice as my guard. We moved through the jungle toward the coordinates Lilith had provided. My scouts had already confirmed the layout earlier that day. The Beastman tribe was settled in a clearing, their huts clustered together with minimal patrols. They clearly didn't expect a human army to come knocking on their doorstep. Alice warned me as we got close. She sensed a powerful, malicious presence, the Beastman shaman Lilith had mentioned. I told Lilith to handle the shaman initially. If she couldn't manage it, Alice would step in. Eilina would stay in the rear as our safety net, keeping wounded soldiers alive with her healing magic. That was why I dared to bring my forces into enemy jungle. Eilina's intermediate-level healing could keep my army fighting far longer than any normal force. I gave Tai the order to attack. The Beastman camp was silent and dark. Even Beastmen needed sleep, and their patrols were sparse. Tai didn't bother with subtlety. He had the archers light fire oil arrows and launch them in a massive volley. Hundreds of flaming arrows arced through the night sky and crashed into the thatched roofs of the Beastmen huts. Fire erupted everywhere within seconds. The Beastmen woke to chaos. They grabbed weapons and charged outside, only to find Tai and the heavy cavalry already tearing through their camp. Tai split the first patrol guard clean in half with a single swing. The power behind his strikes was devastating. Even Beastmen, who prided themselves on being stronger than humans, couldn't match the raw force of my system knights in full armor on warhorses. The Beastmen fought back ferociously despite the surprise. Even dying, they kept swinging their stone hammers. Some of my regular soldiers took hits and went down wounded. But then green energy washed over them. Eilina's healing magic, cast instantly from the rear. Wounds closed in seconds. Soldiers who should have been out of the fight stood back up and charged forward again, laughing. They felt invincible. One soldier shouted that he couldn't be killed, then dove back into the fighting. These were the same men who used to cower behind walls at the sight of Beastmen. Now, with proper leadership, proper equipment, and a healer backing them up, they fought like demons themselves. Then the shaman appeared. An old Beastman in a hooded cloak stepped onto a high point, clutching a staff topped with a purple crystal. He began chanting, and purple energy spheres rained down on my formations. Wherever they landed, my soldiers felt their movements slow, their limbs turning heavy. It was a curse, battlefield-wide magical suppression. I called for Lilith. She pulled out one of the artifacts I'd given her, something shaped like a stringed instrument, and began her own incantation. Strange, beautiful music poured from the artifact, and the shaman's curse shattered. My soldiers moved freely again. The shaman spotted Lilith and recognized her as the demon woman who'd escaped the night before. He mocked her, saying one artifact wouldn't be enough to challenge him. Then he unleashed something far worse. He called it a forbidden technique, heavenly fire that burns the world. A massive magic circle appeared in the sky above us, and purple flames began raining down like a storm. This wasn't a curse anymore. This was pure destructive force. About 100 of my soldiers died instantly. The flames fell too fast, too many at once. Even Eilina couldn't heal people who were killed outright. Lilith grabbed a turtle shell artifact and cast a protective barrier over the main formation. It held, barely, but was cracking under the relentless bombardment. Lilith shouted that she couldn't maintain it much longer. Guilt was written all over her face. She blamed herself for bringing us into this fight. I was furious. Losing 100 soldiers in seconds was unacceptable. I turned to Alice and gave her one command. I wanted the shaman dead. Alice drew her holy sword. Golden light blazed from her armor, blinding in the dark jungle. She announced her judgment in that cold, absolute voice of hers. By the name of holy light, the shaman was sentenced to die. The shaman finally noticed her. The golden radiance made him squint, but he wasn't intimidated. He shouted that not even a temple knight could stop him here. He began casting another forbidden technique. Alice raised her blade. Holy light judgment. The two powers collided. Purple fire against golden radiance. And for a moment the entire jungle lit up like midday. The Beastman shaman was genuinely powerful. Back in the capital, Alice had easily shattered the bishop's dark magic staff, made from sacrificed girls. But this shaman's forbidden technique actually pushed her to her limits. She couldn't fully suppress it from a distance, and I could see the frustration on her face. Then she stopped trying to overpower him with ranged attacks. She planted her feet and launched herself straight at him, moving so fast that even Tai looked stunned. The shaman saw her coming and threw every spell he had at her. But Alice swung her holy sword relentlessly, cutting through each wave of magic like a blade through paper. His spells dissolved one after another until nothing stood between them. He tried to beg. Alice didn't give him the chance. One final strike, and the shaman's power shattered completely. The purple flames vanished from the sky. The oppressive magical pressure that had been crushing my army disappeared instantly. Tai rolled his shoulders, looked at the remaining Beastman warriors, and gave one cold order. Kill them all. The battle ended quickly after that. Without their shaman's magic backing them up, the surviving Beastmen were no match for my knights and soldiers fighting at full strength. Deep inside the Beastman settlement, we found rows of cages. Inside them were humans, all young men and women. Not a single elderly person. These were the slaves the Alliance had sold to the Beastmen. In the center of the camp, 10 women hung from wooden posts, covered in whip marks, their clothes torn to shreds. They were Lilith's companions, the demon women who'd been captured during last night's failed rescue attempt. Lilith burst into tears the moment she saw them. She checked and told me they were still alive. Tai's men were already cutting them down before I could give the order. I told Eilina to heal every single one of them. Tyr approached with his report. All Beastman warriors had been eliminated. About 600 Beastman civilians remained, old ones, women, children. He was asking how to handle them. Even Lilith was watching me carefully for my answer. These were Beastmen, a race that treated humans like livestock and worked them to death as slaves. I made my decision without hesitation. I told Tyr that any Beastman taller than a wagon wheel would be executed. Lilith seemed to accept this. The Beastman children might be spared at least. Then I added one more instruction. Lay the wagon wheel on its side. Lilith's expression froze. A wheel lying flat is barely a foot tall. That meant virtually no one would be spared. But after seeing what the Beastmen had done to those enslaved humans, the cages, the whip marks, the brutalized demon women, even Eilina couldn't summon any sympathy. These Beastmen had earned their fate. Tyr acknowledged the order without blinking and went to carry it out. Some Beastmen screamed curses as the sentence was read. They shouted about revenge and said humanity would pay. Tyr silenced the loudest one with a single sword stroke. Their threats meant nothing. When they'd been torturing human slaves, they hadn't cared about mercy. Now that the roles were reversed, no one would waste mercy on them either. I walked over to the rescued humans. I introduced myself as Count Zhuanghua, Lord of Twin Towers City. I told them they were free and gave them 2 choices: follow me, or leave and return to their homelands. I would respect whatever they decided. They were happy to hear they were rescued, but confusion quickly replaced their joy. They knew the truth. Their own country's nobles had captured and sold them to the Beastmen. Going home meant risking being caught and sold again. Following me meant staying with someone who had actually fought Beastmen to save them, someone who clearly had the power to protect them. One by one, they knelt and pledged their loyalty. Every single person chose to stay. The final count was 237 men and 213 women, 450 people total. All young and healthy. With some training, they'd become a valuable addition to my growing domain. I also freed every human slave scattered throughout the Beastman households. I told all of them the same thing. They weren't anyone's property. They were people, and now they were part of my community. Eilina finished healing Lilith's 10 demon woman companions. I want to meet them. They stared at me with guarded, suspicious eyes. Not surprising, considering what they'd been through. I told them they'd done an admirable thing, fighting to rescue enslaved humans from the Beastmen for 10 years. That earned my respect. I explained the arrangement. Lilith had agreed to serve me in exchange for this rescue mission. That deal was fulfilled. The rest of them were free to go whenever they wanted. One of them, clearly the leader, asked if I was seriously letting them walk away. She pointed out that demon women's heads carried bounties from the temple. I laughed and told her I didn't care about bounty money. I valued their abilities far more than whatever price the temple put on them. Lilith tried to convince her sisters to stay with me. The leader refused, not out of hostility, but caution. She said she needed time to observe whether I was truly different from other human nobles. She warned Lilith to keep her guard up too, no matter how kind I seemed. Then she looked at me and apologized for speaking so candidly. I told her not to worry about it. Healthy skepticism was smarter than blind trust. She'd see the truth eventually. The 10 demon women transformed into clouds of butterflies and vanished into the forest. That escape technique was impressive. I'd have to ask Lilith about it later. Tyre reported that the Beastman settlement was fully secured. Their chief's palace had a storehouse behind it. I went to inspect it personally. When I stepped inside the palace, my system activated right on cue, detecting a claimable territory. I confirmed the occupation immediately. This land was too fertile and strategically valuable to pass up. The only problem was that it had no natural defenses. To make this territory safe, I'd eventually need to conquer the surrounding Beastman tribes as well. But that was a challenge for another day. The system congratulated me on my victory and began generating a reward. It started with 5,000 heavy cavalry. My heart nearly stopped. 5,000 mounted knights would make me unstoppable across the entire continent. But then the familiar crackling sound cut in. System error. Correction in progress. 5,000 heavy cavalry became 1 heavy infantry barracks. The drop in value was painful, but I'd learned to expect this from my broken system. At least I still got something useful. Every reward, no matter how diminished, added to my growing strength. Then the system did something strange. Through the static and crackling, I heard fragments of a voice. It said my name. It said it had always been there. Then it cut out completely. I stared at the panel for a long moment. The system had never spoken to me directly before, not like that. Whatever was happening inside that broken code, something was trying to communicate. But right now wasn't the time to puzzle over it. I had a new territory to develop, rescued civilians to resettle, a growing army to organize, and 6 more Beastman tribes in the area that would eventually need to be dealt with. My domain now stretched from Twin Tower City through the 9th defense line and into Beastman territory itself. The conquest was accelerating, and I intended to keep pushing until there was nothing left to conquer. The heavy infantry barracks was exactly what I needed. The system described it simply. Put in a young, able-bodied person, and after 7 days of training, they'd come out as an elite heavy infantry soldier, fully equipped with armor and weapons at no extra cost. I could train 100 people at a time. In a world where Beastman warriors were physically superior to ordinary human soldiers, this barracks would let me mass-produce fighters who could actually stand toe-to-toe with them. I went to check the Beastman tribe storehouse. It was disappointing, mostly wild animal meat and forest fruits. These beastmen ate like cavemen despite sitting on some of the richest land I'd ever seen. But then I spotted something that made my mouth water, a pile of raw gold ore, high purity, barely needing any refinement. Just melt it down and stamp it into coins. I estimated at least 50,000 gold coins worth. That solved my military payroll problem for a long time. I swept everything valuable into my storage space and ordered the meat distributed to the rescued civilians. Then I pulled everyone back to the defense line. The conquered territory was fertile but completely exposed. No walls, no natural barriers. If other Beastman tribes attacked while my people were still there, it would be a massacre. I left scouts behind to watch the area and report any enemy movement. Sure enough, Beastmen from neighboring tribes discovered the destroyed settlement soon after we left. They were furious when they saw the bodies. But they didn't suspect humans. They knew the 9th defense line garrison had never been brave enough to cross the wall and attack. Instead, suspicion fell on the strongest local tribe, the Deer Mountain tribe. Their investigation order made the smaller tribes nervous, and old rivalries flared up. Everyone started pointing fingers and reinforcing their own defenses. The Beastman tribes were turning on each other without me lifting a finger. Perfect. Back in Twin Tower City, I placed the infantry barracks behind the Lord's castle and immediately loaded 100 recruits into it. Then the system informed me it required 100 gold coins as a training fee. That detail hadn't been mentioned in the original description. I grumbled about the surprise charge, but paid it without hesitation. 100 gold coins for 100 fully equipped elite soldiers was still an incredible bargain. The barracks sealed shut once training began. I couldn't enter or observe the process. I just had to wait 7 days. But when those 100 soldiers emerged, combined with my military talisman's 500 summoned troops, I'd have 600 heavy infantry ready for deployment. Enough to assault another Beastman tribe at any time. The next morning brought another surprise from my daily summoning. Instead of the usual heavy cavalry knight, the system produced something entirely new, a tiger-leopard cavalry rider. The warrior appeared mounted on a beast that looked like a leopard but was built bigger than a tiger, sleek, powerful, and terrifyingly fast. The rider himself carried a heavy longbow on his back and a single long blade at his hip. He introduced himself as Chow Fong of the Tiger-Leopard Cavalry. I recognized the reference immediately. Tiger-Leopard Cavalry. That was Cao Cao's legendary mounted unit from the Three Kingdoms era, a force famous for devastating hit-and-run tactics and mounted archery. Chow Fong wasn't as heavily armored as Tai Yi, but his strengths were different. Where Tai Yi excelled at head-on charges and brute force, Chow Fong was built for speed, flanking, and range combat. They'd complement each other perfectly in battle. I just wished I'd gotten 1,000 of them instead of one. Later that morning, I received unexpected visitors. Xiaohe reported that Lord Tinglan of Finland Town had arrived with a single knight. No soldiers, no supplies, just himself and one escort. This was the same Tinglan whose people had tried to poison my horses when I'd passed through his town. I hadn't forgotten that, though I'd chosen not to act on it at the time. Now he was showing up uninvited. Interesting. I received him in the Great Hall. He introduced himself with polished courtesy. Baron Tinglan, Lord of Finland Town, fellow noble of Lane Kingdom. He said he'd heard about the Beastman attack on Twin Tower City and had come to help. I asked him directly how many troops he'd brought for reinforcement. 100? 200? His face went pale. He hadn't brought anyone. I asked about supply wagons then. I turned to Eilina and asked her to check his convoy's inventory. She told me he'd come completely empty-handed. I dropped the friendly expression instantly. I told Tinglan that he clearly hadn't come to support me. He'd come to watch me struggle, maybe even hoping the Beastmen would finish me off. Or perhaps he was working with the Beastmen, in which case, I'd have to kill him and investigate the connection properly. Tinglan turned white as a ghost. He stammered that it was all a misunderstanding. He insisted he absolutely had brought supplies, 10,000 pounds of grain and 5,000 gold coins. But the shipment was still being organized and would arrive tomorrow. Definitely tomorrow. I softened my expression and told Eilina to write down his exact promises with pen and paper. I said we'd verify the delivery tomorrow, and if anything was missing, I'd personally visit Finland Town to root out whatever corruption was preventing the supplies from arriving. Eilina took out an actual notebook and started writing with complete seriousness. Tinglan watched her recording his every word and could only smile nervously. He knew he was trapped. He'd have to actually send those supplies now or face consequences far worse than the cost of the goods. I told him that since the supplies weren't here yet, there was no reason for him to stay for dinner. He barely had time to protest before he found himself standing outside the castle gates. He turned around, realizing he hadn't even gotten to discuss whatever he'd actually come to talk about. He tried to get back in, but Alice blocked the entrance. He explained that he had more business with me. Alice told him flatly that I was resting and he could come back tomorrow. He tried to insist. Alice's hand moved to her holy sword. She asked him in that ice-cold voice of hers whether he wanted to settle this physically. Tinglan's knight took one look at the golden-armored woman radiating killing intent and wisely pulled his lord backward. They retreated without another word. I didn't know exactly what Tinglan had really come for, and honestly I didn't care much. What mattered was that he'd now be sending me 10,000 pounds of grain and 5,000 gold coins by tomorrow, whether he'd originally planned to or not. Every neighboring lord who came sniffing around my territory would leave lighter than they arrived. That was just the cost of doing business with me. My domain was expanding rapidly. Twin Towers City as my base, the 9th defense line as my western wall, conquered Beastman territory as my new farmland, 100 elite soldiers training in the barracks, gold reserves growing, and the Beastman tribes across the border tearing themselves apart over who had destroyed one of their own. Every piece was falling into place. And tomorrow, the system would give me more knights. The barracks would keep producing soldiers. My territory's prosperity would keep climbing. Sooner or later, the system would unlock its next feature, and I'd become even stronger. This world had no idea what was coming. Tinglan nearly jumped out of his skin when Alice reached for her sword. He and his knight practically ran out of the castle, swearing they'd come back with supplies. On the ride home, his knight asked if they were really leaving without accomplishing anything. Tinglon gritted his teeth and said they needed to prepare the grain and gold coins first, otherwise I'd never give him a meeting. He muttered that compared to the profits he stood to gain from a future partnership, these upfront costs were nothing. Inside the castle, Eilina asked me if I really thought Tinglon would deliver. I told her absolutely. Before Trenton died, he and Tinglon had clearly been running some kind of business together. And I hadn't forgotten what happened at Finland Town. Someone had poisoned our horse feed while we stayed there. That happened on Tinglon's turf. There was no way the lord of a town didn't know what was happening in his own stables. I'd been waiting to deal with him, and now he'd walked right into my hands by showing up uninvited. Eilina asked if I'd meet with him again tomorrow. I said yes, with emphasis. He was bringing grain and gold coins. Of course I'd see him. That was free money walking through my door. The next morning I summoned my daily knight. Just one heavy cavalry rider this time. After getting 5 per night twice in a row, going back to 1 felt almost insulting. But consistency was the real strength of my system. Even single daily additions compounded over time. Eilina reported that Tinglon had arrived bright and early, and his supply wagons were confirmed. 10,000 pounds of grain and 5,000 gold coins, exactly as promised. Good. I had her show him to the study. Tinglon tried to jump straight into his pitch, but I cut him off. I asked if he knew about the 9th defense line falling. He said he didn't and tried to redirect the conversation again. I stopped him a second time. I explained that beastmen had broken through the defense line and attacked Twin Towers City. I'd held them off, but what about next time? Finland Town was right next door. If I couldn't stop the beastmen, his town would be overrun next. I told him I needed 500 soldiers from Finland Town. His jaw dropped. He said he only had 2 knights and fewer than 200 soldiers total. 500 fighting men was impossible. I told him I didn't need his knights, just bodies. Finland Town was a large, prosperous trading hub with a dense population. Recruiting 500 men from the civilian population shouldn't be difficult for a lord of his resources. Unless, of course, he didn't take the beastman threat seriously. In which case, I'd have to assume he was collaborating with the enemy. Under both Allied military law and Lane Kingdom statutes, that was a crime I could personally judge and execute him for. Tinglon panicked and swore he'd never even left the kingdom, let alone conspired with beastmen. I smiled and said that was wonderful news. So when could I expect the 500 men? He realized he was cornered and reluctantly agreed. But he insisted I hear his business proposal first. I'd gotten what I wanted, so I let him talk. He explained his arrangement with Trenton. Tinglon had been collecting strategic goods from across the kingdom, salt, iron, and other control materials, then shipping them to Twin Towers City. Trenton, using the border fortress's unique position, had been reselling these goods to foreign nations at enormous markups. Both sides profited handsomely. I asked him bluntly if those foreign buyers included the Beastman tribes. He stammered and claimed he only handled transportation. Where Trenton sold the goods was supposedly none of his business. A convenient excuse, but I filed it away for later. He offered me the same deal. If I took over Trenton's role as the seller, he'd keep supplying the goods. He promised at least 5,000 gold coins per month in pure profit. The buyers were already lined up. He specifically mentioned Knight Commander Leon and Knight Charles from the 9th Defense Line as regular customers. Those 2 names almost made me laugh. Leon and Charles had abandoned the defense line and fled north days ago. Tinglon had no idea. He was trying to sell me a business partnership with people who no longer existed at the location where the deals used to happen. His intelligence was completely outdated. He looked at me with confident, greedy eyes, clearly believing that no one could resist 5,000 gold coins per month. He thought I'd cave to the money just like every other noble he'd ever dealt with. I told him no. Flat refusal. No interest whatsoever. His face fell. He tried to argue, but I told Eilina to escort him out. He got up reluctantly and started walking toward the door. Then I called out to him. He spun around with excitement on his face, thinking I'd changed my mind. I told him this was a reminder, not a negotiation. 500 men, delivered to Twin Towers City within 2 days. If he failed, I'd arrest him for smuggling kingdom resources, a charge I could easily prove given what he'd just told me about his salt and iron trafficking operation. I reminded him of my relationship with Princess Midia and the fact that I'd personally saved King Lance's government. If I wanted him arrested, there wasn't a corner of Lane Kingdom where he could hide. His face went gray. He mumbled that the men would arrive on time and left without another word. Eileen asked what I'd do if he didn't deliver. I told her exactly what I'd said: remove him. A lord who refused to contribute to the kingdom's defense didn't deserve to keep his position or his head.